Temporary duty assignments, TDY, can sometimes be fun and exciting, but this one was not. It was 30 days of almost round-the-clock hard work. Every year, the U.S. Army participates in a rapid deployment exercise. Several units from across the Army are selected to participate and are airlifted with all their equipment to Germany, where they engage in a month-long exercise with their NATO counterparts. My name is Fred Sadler. At the time, I was a relatively new captain in the U.S. Army working in the Operations Division stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. This deployment came at the worst possible time for me to be anywhere other than home with my wife, who was pregnant and due to deliver sometime during the deployment. Lydia and I had been married for almost 6 years. When the deployment began, my commanding officer said, "I give you a personal guarantee that I will do everything in my power to get you home before the baby is born." And he did. At the end of the exercise, I packed my things and was about to get on a plane. I called Lydia, who told me she thought she was going to be hospitalized in the next couple of days. "Then the timing must be perfect because I'm on my way home," I told her. It was dusk. I was driving to the airport when a deer ran out into the road. My driver swerved to avoid it, and the next thing I knew, I woke up in a military hospital in Frankfurt. My right arm, right leg, 3 ribs on my side were broken, and my right lung had collapsed. "How long have I been here?" I asked my nurse. 5 days. "Is my wife here?" "No, sir." I called Lydia. "Are you okay?" were her first words. "Don't mind me. How are you, and the baby?" She began to cry. "We lost the baby, Fred." "I'm so sorry." "Are you okay?" I asked. "Physically, I'm fine, but emotionally, I'm a mess." 2 weeks later, I was flown home on a medevac airplane. Lydia met me and traveled with me to the Fort Hood Hospital. She was still an emotional wreck, but our time together seemed to help us both. I was in the hospital for another 2 weeks before I was discharged on limited duty. 2 years after we lost a child, we were transferred to Heidelberg, Germany. We spent 3 years there traveling all over Europe. There, I was promoted to major. After 3 years, we were transferred to Fort Lewis, Washington. Being a major, we were given field-grade officers' quarters. They were much nicer than company grade and had garages, not just carports. When we moved into the cabin in Lewis, all the things we took with us to Germany were sent back. We unpacked those boxes as well as the boxes we had stored and did not take with us. Using a box cutter, I opened one of the many boxes and began to take things out of it. It was the box we had stored things in while we were in Germany. About halfway down was a small wooden box that I didn't remember seeing before. I placed it on top of the stack of boxes and opened it. My life changed forever. There was a small stack of envelopes with a pink ribbon around them. I pulled the ribbon away and picked up the top envelope. It was unsealed, and I opened it. Inside was an official document labeled birth certificate. As I looked at the document, my mind began to fog up. It stated that a baby girl weighing 7 pounds 6 ounces and 19 inches long was born alive, and it included the date. It was the same date Lydia had told me our baby was not alive when born. The baby was named Hope. It went on to say that the mother's name was Lydia Jane Sadler Nee Johnston. Where the father's name was listed, there was a note that said, "Unknown." I picked up the next envelope. It, too, was unsealed. I pulled out a multi-page document. It was an adoption certificate. I read it several times. The gist of it was that a child named Hope, born to Lydia Sadler, had been given up for adoption and stripped of all parental rights. It went on to say that since the identity of the biological father is unknown, his permission is not required. How many men had she slept with in that time? Did she know? She had to know that even in marriage, we need personal space and thoughts. I drove up to the golf course, parked the car, and headed to the 19th hole where there was a bar diner and restaurant. I ordered 2 eggs over medium heat and corned beef hash. This used to be my favorite breakfast until Lydia changed my eating habits. I managed to eat most of it and sat on the deck while the golfers finished the 18th hole and went inside. When I got home, it was the middle of the day. She had made a lot of progress in taking down boxes and organizing the house. I went to my unit and went into the office. There was no one there except the officer on duty. I sat down at my desk and tried to work, but my heart was not in it. When I got home, it was past midnight. She was lying in bed reading. I undressed and took a shower. "I'll sleep downstairs," I announced as I walked out and closed the door. I had just turned on the TV and was getting comfortable on the couch when she walked in, grabbed the remote, turned off the TV, and stared at me. "Cut the crap! Tell me what's wrong and I'll either help you or leave. Which is it? I haven't done anything wrong, so I won't tolerate you yelling at me when I'm trying to help or having to get out of your way when you try to run me down." I walked over to her, took the remote from her hands, and turned the TV back on. "Have a safe trip," I said. She left less than an hour later. On Monday morning, I talked to my commander and told him my story. I even showed him the documents. He was as dumbfounded as I was. "What do you plan to do?" he asked me. "I'm not sure." "Did she say where she was going when she left?" "No, sir, but she didn't take all her things, especially the box." There was a pause before I spoke again. "I was thinking of trying to find my daughter if she is my daughter and proceed from there." "It would be virtually impossible. In adoption cases, confidentiality is very important to both parties," he said. "I understand, but I have to do something. I have to start somewhere, and I don't trust her to tell me the truth anymore." Then I literally jumped up. "Oh my God, I have an idea. Can I have the day off?" "Sure." I saluted and ran out of his office and building into the parking lot, where I jumped in my car and drove home. I opened the box, pulled out a wooden box, and dumped the contents on the floor. There was a pacifier in there. A pacifier? Hope must have used it before she was taken. I put the box back together, put the pacifier in a clear plastic bag, and sealed it. I got on the internet, trying to find a DNA lab in the area. There was one in downtown Seattle. I went into the bathroom, but all of Lydia's things were gone. I rummaged through the cabinet under the sink, found her old hairbrush, put it in another plastic bag along with the bag that held the pacifier, and hauled back to Seattle. "We'll call you in about 3 weeks, she said. I didn't hear from Lydia for another whole day. "Hi," I said. "Are you feeling better?" "Better than what?" "Better than the idiot you were a couple days ago." "No, same old idiot." "Why 3 weeks?" "Exactly. By then I should know if I'm going to eliminate you or just divorce you." I ended the conversation. The phone immediately rang, and I ignored it. The next day when I got home, Lydia was already there. She met my car as I pulled up to the house. She was furious. "What do you mean you're going to either liquidate me or divorce me?" "Exactly what I said." "I think I deserve an explanation," she said. "Me too." "About what?" she asked. We were still in the driveway. "You mean you don't need to explain anything?" I asked. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. So there's no hope for us," I said, putting as much emphasis as possible on the word hope. "What do you mean there's no hope for us? What have I done?" Then it hit her. "Oh my God, no, please no." "I'll be back in an hour and you'd better not be here. I'll leave for work in the morning at 6:30. I'll be back at 5. By then, all your stuff should be out of this house." I left. I came back exactly an hour later and she was gone. And so was the box and some of her things. When I got home in the evening, the house was almost empty. She had picked out almost all the furniture and taken it away. True, she left my favorite chair and a bedroom set for guests. The next morning, I called my office to let them know I would be late. I then called Post Housing and arranged for government furniture to be temporarily brought to my apartment. I also called the credit union, our stockbroker, the insurance company, and anyone else I could think of, and went about those mundane housekeeping things that are usually associated with divorce. I then made an appointment with a JAG, Judge Advocate General Army lawyer. I knew they were not authorized to represent me in civilian court, but they could advise me. They confirmed what I suspected. She would get half. We lived in public housing, so we didn't own a house, but we had enough equity to buy one if we wanted to. Both our cars were paid off. My life continued for a couple more weeks. I went to work, did my chores, mowed the lawn, and washed and cleaned my car. One morning, the phone rang. "Hello?" I answered. "Is that Major Fred Sadler?" "It is." "Major Sadler, this is Margie from the DNA Analysis Center. A few weeks ago, you gave us some samples to test." "Yes, I did." "Well, the results are in, and you can come in and look at them." "Can't you just tell me now?" "No, sir, I can't. We can either mail them to the address you gave us or show them to you in person. We have no way to verify over the phone that you are who you say you are. We have to see identification. We can mail the results because, as you may recall, we asked you for ID when you were here and we were able to verify your address." "I'll be there as soon as I can." I walked through their door, introduced myself, and asked for Margie. She came out and we shook hands. She asked to see my identification. "Come with me, please," she said. I followed her into a small room. She asked me to wait. She left and came back a couple of minutes later. She handed me the pacifier and then spoke. "Sample A is yours. Sample B is from the hair you gave us, and sample C is from the pacifier. We were able to determine that samples B and C are positively related. Sample A is not related to either B or C." "Thanks," I said, took the pacifier, put it in my pocket, took the papers, and left. I got into my car. At least I didn't have a daughter calling some other man daddy. But someone else did. JAG was not authorized to recommend specific law firms or attorneys, but the JAG officer I spoke with was able to provide me with a list of approved attorneys and firms. The next day, I started calling them. I made 6 appointments. At the 3rd appointment, I found my man. He was a retired JAG officer and hated cheating spouses, both wife and husband. I spent over an hour telling him my story. When I got home, it was late. There was a letter in the mailbox. It was from Lydia. "Fred, 3 weeks are up. Lydia." Short and to the point. The return address was her parents' address in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. I called her. "Hi, Fred," she said. "I won't talk about it over the phone, and I'm certainly not flying to Pennsylvania, so I guess you'll have to come here. If you mean Seattle, I'm already here. I sent a letter last week when I was there. I'll be at the house at 6:30. Come over then," I told her. She hung up. I didn't make any special arrangements. No drinks, no cheese, no crackers, nothing. This was supposed to be a business meeting. I put the DNA documents and my copies of the birth certificate and adoption papers on the government-issued coffee table. She pulled up to the driveway at 6:20, but waited until exactly 6:30 to ring the bell. I was in no hurry to answer it. Opening the door, I invited her in and indicated where she should sit. I sat on the couch. She sat in the uncomfortable straight-back chair across from me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pacifier and held it out to her. She grabbed it and held it to her bosom. "Thank you," she said, as if I'd given her $1 million. Then I handed her a copy of the DNA test results. "You already know I'm not the father, but this will confirm it." She reached for the results and took them with her left hand. The pacifier remained clutched in her right. "I take it you are sample A?" she asked. "Yes." Then I pushed the rest of the papers toward her. Without saying anything, she leaned forward, read the title on the top sheet, and tears welled up in her eyes. She set the DNA test results aside and picked up the dissolution of marriage application. She started to read it, but the tears were already flowing freely and falling onto the form, so she set it aside. "Can I have a tissue?" she asked. "I don't have any." "You're not making it easy for me, are you?" she asked. "You cheated," I said. She nodded. "How many times?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "No, I just want to know. One weekend, different men, just one." "Who is he?" "Then again, does it really matter? Again, I just want to know. I think I deserve it." "I'm not going to tell you." "Do I know him?" "I'm not going to tell you." "So you'd rather protect him than try to save your marriage?" She picked up the divorce petition. "Our marriage is over anyway. Why ruin it?" "Okay, but you have to tell me why you lied about your daughter being not alive when born." "When I found out I was pregnant, I wasn't sure if it was your baby or his. I thought about getting infanticide, but I couldn't. Over time, I was able to reason that you can't know for sure if it's your baby or not. When we found out it was going to be a girl, I was even more sure you wouldn't know, because there is a special bond between dad and daughter, and I was sure you and her would look alike. As the time of her birth approached, I started to get nervous. Maybe you would find out she wasn't yours. Then you went away on a business trip and my nerves calmed down a bit. I was glad you wouldn't be around when she was born. Then you told me you were flying home and I started to get nervous again. My emotions have been on a roller coaster. Maybe you'll know, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be there when she's born. Maybe you won't. I was nervous then. She was there, alive and perfect. She was placed on my chest and I looked at her and fell in love. She was beautiful. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. She paused. Just like her father's. You have brown hair and brown eyes. No one in our families has blonde hair and blue eyes. I knew she wasn't yours. She was my daughter, and you were my husband. I loved you both, but I knew I had to choose between you. I chose you. The hospital staff helped me when I told them I wanted to give her up for adoption. Within 24 hours, I had the papers in my hands. They asked who the baby's father was, and I said I didn't know. They said it would be easier that way, because if I knew who the father was, they would have to get his permission. I just bosomed her and held her in my arms. She was sucking on a pacifier when they brought me the papers to sign. I knew I had to tell you something, so I made up the lie that she was not alive when born and her remains were cremated when you came home. I couldn't believe you didn't ask to see the birth certificate, certificate of pass away, or anything else. I still can't believe it. I trusted you, I said. I had no reason not to trust you. Besides, it was so traumatic that I saw no reason to add to our suffering by looking at those pieces of paper. Eventually, you and I got our lives back to normal, and I was almost happy. But a part of me was missing. It still is. And it gets worse every year. On her birthday, I always took the time to pull out her birth certificate, touch her little footprints, and hold her pacifier. There were times when I wanted to put it in my mouth to feel closer to her, but it had some of my dried bosom milk on it, and I wanted to preserve it, so I didn't. They must have scraped it off at the DNA lab. Oh my God, it's gone. She groaned, then looked at me. It's gone. Her milk is gone, you idiot. You took her milk. She fell to her knees and literally curled up in a ball on the floor. I picked her up and put her on the couch. I couldn't let her leave in that condition, so I covered her with a blanket and went to my bedroom, but not to bed. She remained there for several hours. At midnight, I heard the toilet flush. I went downstairs. She was sitting on the couch. Would you like some coffee? I asked. Yes, please. She sat down at the counter while I brewed her a cup. She took a sip. I guess I got a little cold feet, huh? Sort of. We sat in silence and drank coffee. More? I asked. Yes, please, she replied. Where are you staying? I asked, brewing 2 more cups. At the motel. You were there for more than 3 weeks? No, I was with my parents most of the time. Do they know the truth? No, I lied to them too. I told them that you and I were going through a difficult time and I needed to get away from you for a while. They paid for me to visit them. They think I came back to help sort out our difficulties. She looked around, walked over to the coffee table, pulled a pen out of her purse, sat down, signed the divorce papers without reading them, and left. When I woke up, it was the middle of Sunday morning. I spent the rest of the day thinking. I took the divorce papers to my attorney on Monday, and he filed them. I've been thinking a lot about who Lydia cheated with. She never told me who he was or how the affair started. It wasn't just that she cheated and got pregnant that made me angry. It was that she defended the idiot and wouldn't tell me who he was. The only thing she told me was that it only lasted 1 weekend. Fortunately, I was so busy at work that I didn't have time to think about anything else. 2 weeks later, I was back at Fort Hood where Lydia and I were living when her daughter was born. Usually military seminars are pretty intense, but this one was relaxed. We were divided into groups of 3 to work on a project. It turned out that there were 6 groups of 3 and there were 2 left, a major from Alaska and myself. We developed a close friendship almost immediately. It seemed like we'd known each other all our lives. His name was Keith Franklin, and as I said, he was stationed in Alaska at Fort Wainwright, the coldest base in the U.S. Army. But he loved it there. He was a computer genius, and we were so far ahead of everyone else that we had to slow down and wait for them to catch up. On Friday of the first week, we had lunch at the officers' club. He told me about his personal life. He cheated on his wife, and she divorced him. She is now living with some civilian, and his 2 children call the other man Daddy. Toward the end of lunch, I laid out my story too. When I finished, he had a strange look in his eyes. And you don't know who the man she had an affair with is? No, she didn't tell me. And that was here in Hood? Yes, 5 years ago. It's almost 6. Blonde hair and blue eyes. That's what she said. Come with me. We went to the Manpower Center. Everyone assigned to Fort Hood had to go through it. We walked right into the HR director's office. She saw us, stood up, and went around her desk to give Keith a hug. She looked to be about 60 years old and had a sparkle in her eyes. I liked her, and I hadn't even talked to her yet. Aunt Lucy, this is Fred Sadler. Hi, Fred, she said, shaking my hand. Hello, Mrs. Healy's nameplate on her desk read, Mrs. Healy. I began call me Aunt Lucy. Everyone does. Aunt Lucy began. Keith, do you remember the fair-haired, blue-eyed officer who may have been here about 6 years ago? She thought for a few seconds. No, but I don't always see everyone who passes through here. They all have to, but that doesn't mean I see them. She thought some more. Fred Sadler, you were here around that time, weren't you? I remember that name. Yes, my wife and I were here, I said. I looked at Keith as if asking how she remembered that. Keith looked at me. Aunt Lucy has Sam, and she can remember just about anything she's read, seen, or been involved with. That includes people. She can remember everyone she's ever met. Sam? I asked. Yes, supreme autobiographical memory. It's a state of being. Or a curse, Aunt Lucy interrupted. Or a curse? Keith continued. Very few people have it. Aunt Lucy is Fort Hood's institutional memory, especially when it comes to personnel matters. Isn't that right, Aunt Lucy? Unfortunately. I looked at her, then at Keith, then back at her. You remember everything? Everything that happens to me personally. Jesus, I said. How do you have room for all this? We don't know. It's just always there. Does it have any downsides? I asked. Oh, God, yes. I remember the good as well as the bad. It can cause depression if you allow yourself to do that. I can only imagine, I told her. Aunt Lucy, Keith interrupted again. Fred, he pointed at me. He's looking for someone who was here at the same time. The only thing he knows about him is that he was blonde with blue eyes, she laughed. That's it? No height, no weight, no rank, no assignment, not even his initials. No, ma'am, I said. Calling me ma'am is a waste of good oxygen, Fred. I'm Aunt Lucy. Give me time to think and maybe ask around. Does it matter? Keith looked at me and I answered, Yes, Aunt Lucy, it's important. Oh, he was about the same age as me when I was here, if that helps, and he was in the Army. Officer or private? I suppose he was an officer if he was in the Army. So you don't even know if he was in the service? No, I don't. Or a civil servant? No. I'm sorry, I know it's not much to go on. She laughed. Yeah, there's just nothing to target. There can't be more than 2,000 blonde-haired, blue-eyed men I've encountered in the last few years, but I'll see if I can narrow down the time frame. She took both of our phone numbers. 2 days later, she called Keith. I've been thinking about the man you asked about. I don't remember any blonde-haired and blue-eyed soldiers, either officers or privates who were about the right age, but I know 2 civilians who work for the Office of Postal Engineers. One has worked there for about 30 years, so he's probably too old. The other has been working there for about 10 years. He's in charge of new construction now, but he used to be the head of the plumbing department. His name is Kurt Weber. There are about 15 other blue-eyed blondes on post, but the ages don't fit. And I didn't bother trying to remember civilians living off base because I assumed that when Major Sadler was here, he didn't have time to make many civilian friends. Keith told me, and I immediately started planning how to meet Weber, find out if he was the right man, and maybe get a little revenge. The men who prey on the wives of our military personnel are the second lowest form of life on the planet. The lowest, of course, are those who prey on wives when the serviceman is overseas. These idiots deserve the worst fate imaginable. The next morning, I was sitting on the next street over from Weber's house in my rental car. I was hoping he was golfing or doing some homemade crafts, so maybe he was on his way to the local hardware or lumber store. I had been sitting there for almost 2 hours when I saw his car pull out of the garage and speed down the street. Thank God, I thought. I didn't feel like sitting here all day to see if he'd gone somewhere, but I was willing to do it if I had to. I followed him to the Home Depot. We parked and I followed him into the store. He was obviously known there because he talked to a few of the employees. There was a spot right in front of the door where there was a coffee urn. I knew enough about Home Depot to know that their regular contractor customers could treat themselves. Weber helped himself and stood sipping his drink while he chatted with one of the salesmen behind the counter. Watching Mr. Weber, I realized not only did he have physical engaging with my wife and make her pregnant, but he chewed gum with his mouth open. Other than spitting on the sidewalk, I couldn't think of anything more disgusting. The clerk Weber was chatting with had to go help a customer, so Weber took one last sip of coffee, spit the gum into a paper cup, and walked away unwrapping another piece of gum. I walked over to the trash can, looked in it, and saw right on top of it a paper coffee cup with a pack of gum in it. I looked around, didn't see anyone, and took the cup. I got in the car and called Keith. I told him what I had. He laughed and told me to hurry back, that he might have something bigger by the time I got there. When I approached, he was literally jumping from place to place and waving some papers around. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "You won't really believe it." He grabbed my arm. "Look at this." "No, you better sit down." I did. He sat down next to me and put the papers in front of me. "Now look." There were a few names and an address. "So?" I asked. "So what?" "That's Hope's name address and her family's name. Her name is Sarah now. Sarah Randolph. I hacked into the files of an adoption agency. Those files are encrypted better than the nuclear missile launch codes carried by the President of the United States." Then he stopped and calmed down. "Well, I didn't personally hack their files. My brother did. But it's the same thing." I started to laugh. "That's great, Keith, but what exactly am I going to do with it?" "I have no idea, but you have them. Maybe we can blackmail someone." "Oh, that's great. I can already see the headlines. 2 Army officers tried to blackmail a 6-year-old foster child. That's a great one." He tossed the papers on the coffee table and leaned back in his chair. "Yes, I see where you're going with this." He got a little flustered again. "But we cracked their defenses. That's something." "Yeah, that's something," I said, laughing. I carried the papers and coffee cup back to my Bo Q and placed them on the desk. I have no idea why I did it, but I looked up the address where Hope lived and drove there early Sunday morning. It was almost 200 miles to Corsicana. The house was a typical suburban house. I sat outside for about an hour observing American suburbia on a typical Sunday. The noise of a few lawnmowers, the screams of children, and the chatter of neighbors. No activity came from Hope's house until almost noon. A car pulled up to the driveway. There were 3 people in the car. A man was driving. A woman was in the front passenger seat, and a child was in the right rear seat. The woman got out of the car, closed her door, and reached for the right rear door. I was at the ready with my cell phone. The woman removed the child from the car seat and placed the child on the ground, then knelt down to straighten the baby's dress. I had just enough time to take a few pictures. I heard a noise next to my car. A woman and a child were walking by. "Sarah!" The child next to my car squeaked, and she ran towards another child who I realized was Hope and ran towards her. They were only a few feet away from my car, and I took a few more quick pictures. I started my car and drove off before either of the 2 women became interested in the strange car and man parked on their street. I drove a short distance away and stopped to look at the pictures. 4 were absolutely perfect. I could even make out her blue eyes. I drove back to Fort Hood the following week. Keith and I finished the course with ease. We graduated on Friday and then had dinner and a few drinks together. Saturday morning, we went to the airport and flew home, Keith to Alaska and me to Seattle. The following Monday was a school day, so I had the day off. I took Lydia and Hope Margie's DNA reports to the DNA testing center. She didn't remember me until I reminded her about the pacifier. I gave her Lydia and Hope's DNA results and handed her a coffee cup with gum. "See you in 3 weeks," I said as I left. In fact, it only took 2. This time she gave me the results over the phone. "It's a married couple, no doubt," she said. "Mother, father, and child." She would send me the official results in the mail. Okay, I had all the information I needed. But what was it for? What was I going to do with it? All it did was confirm that Weber was, in fact, the guy Lydia had cheated with. I went to Walmart and bought paper and envelopes. I also made copies of 2 photographs of Hope in the DNA reports belonging to Weber. Lydia and Hope. On the DNA reports, I cut off anything that could tell where the report came from. I put it all in an envelope. I made sure I had gloves on. From the moment I opened the bag of paper and the box of envelopes made copies of the photos and DNA reports. I even used self-adhesive stamps and water not saliva to seal the envelope. I made every effort to keep it untraceable. I addressed it to Mrs. Kurt Weber at their home address. I also included Lydia's name and her parents' address because I had no idea where she was. Then I drove to Seattle's main post office and dropped the letter in the mailbox. I had no idea what would happen in Killeen, Texas home of Fort Hood and the Weber family when the package arrived. The news from Killeen was a little over a month old. I got a call from Aunt Lucy. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer," she said. "I'll do my best. Whatever you're doing isn't good enough. I need complete honesty. Is that what you and Keith did to Weber?" "Aunt Lucy, I don't mean to sound smart, but what did we do to him? Set him up so his wife would file for divorce? Okay, here's what I did. Keith had nothing to do with it." I told her the truth. Most of it anyway. I omitted Keith's part. "You certainly stirred up a hornet's nest. Apparently when his wife received your package, she didn't know if your DNA was his or someone else's. So she did it herself. She took some of his DNA and sent it off for processing. She also sent the profiles of that woman and the baby. They matched. And that's where it all went downhill." "Who was the woman he was flirting with?" "She was my wife, Aunt Lucy." "Oh, Jesus. I thought it might be something like that. Well, he was brought into the office yesterday, and he's not thrilled. He was ranting and raving all over the base." "Good. Hearing from you that his marriage is over is the best news I've heard in a while. I just feel sorry for his family." It was over for me. Lydia and I were divorced, and Weber was on the road to divorce. I folded all the papers Keith had given me into a folder and put it in a box with other things I no longer needed but kept anyway. My life was moving on. Over the next few months, I went on a couple of dates, but nothing much happened. 2 years later, I returned to Fort Hood. I was surprised because I expected to be sent overseas like 90% of my classmates. Once in Hood, I found myself in Aunt Lucy's office. "How did you get back here?" she asked. "I have no idea." "Yes," came a voice from the past. It was newly promoted Lieutenant Colonel LTC, Keith Franklin. He walked into the office, closed the door, and we shook hands. It turned out I needed an assistant. and a major who had just graduated from CNGS was just what I needed, so I asked him. Keith and I had talked a few times since we arrived at the seminar, but hadn't seen each other. I was glad to see my friend. After registering, I took a vacation for 2 weeks. The first thing I did was to look for a house. Lydia and I had been saving up to buy it. I assumed that she would get half of it in the divorce, but since she didn't show up in court, I got everything. The branch manager walked by. He introduced himself as Dwight Randolph. We moved here about 6 months ago and settled in a brand new neighborhood. The houses are very nice and inexpensive. You get a lot of value for your money. He told me this, then went to his office and returned with a business card from the agent whose services he had used. I called her, and it only took me 3 days to find what I wanted. I paid more than half of the down payment, and the bank was happy to finance the rest. I started working with Keith and moved into my new house. The first things I bought were a bed, a chair, a big TV, and a lawnmower. I was spending my first night in my new house. It was already dark outside, and I had no curtains or drapes. There weren't even enough sheets to cover the big front window. I had just opened a beer and was holding a slice of pepperoni pizza in my hand when the doorbell rang. I had long since gotten off the no red meat diet Lydia had kept me on. I opened the door, and there stood a woman. "Hi, neighbor," she said. "My name is Samantha Randolph, but everyone calls me Sammy. We live in the neighborhood. We haven't lived here long ourselves, and I just wanted to say hello, introduce myself, and tell you that if you need anything, just ask." "Is your wife here?" I smiled. "Fred Sadler. No wife, divorced." I saw her frown. "But don't worry, I don't throw loud wild parties or even soft wild parties." She smiled. We chatted for a few more minutes before she left. The first week in my new home flew by. On Saturday morning, 3 women rang the doorbell and brought food. They also brought decorating ideas. They had seen my empty house with the lights on at night. As I sat in it with nothing but a chair, TV, beer, and pizza, they decided it was time to help me. The ringleader was Sammy Randolph. A couple of hours later, I had a slightly worn but nice leather couch, a dining table and chairs, and a small coffee table to keep the pizza off the floor. The ladies were about to leave when 3 small children came running in, chasing each other. One of the ladies, Ruth, grabbed 2 of the children, and Sammy grabbed the third. "Calm down, Sarah," she said, kneeling beside the child and brushing her blonde hair away from her blue eyes. "This is our new neighbor, Major Sadler." "Hello," she said confidently. "My name is Sarah." I leaned over. "Hi, Sarah," I said, looking into her piercing blue eyes. Blonde hair and blue eyes. I shook my head. "How old are you, Sarah?" "I'll be 7 soon." I stood up and we all said our goodbyes. As soon as they left, I went to the room that was to be my den, found the right box, opened it, and pulled out a folder. In it were the pictures I had taken. It was the same baby. I hadn't paid attention to the names of the foster parents before, but now I did. The adoption papers named Dwight and Samantha Randolph as Hope's adoptive parents. Sammy and her friend mostly decorated my house. It took a few weeks, and when it was done, we had a neighborhood open house. Sammy invited her sister-in-law, Joni Payne, who happened to be divorced. I hadn't enjoyed female companionship in a long time, and Joni and I hit it off right away. She was the last to leave the party, and I couldn't wait to call her. The next day, we met for lunch and had dinner with Dwight, Sammy, and Sarah. Sarah was brief because she wanted to go play with her friends. Over the next few months, we were together as often as possible. The first night we spent together was very good. We were sitting at the kitchen island when the doorbell rang. I threw on my robe and went to answer it. It was Sammy. "Good afternoon, Fred," she said as she walked inside. "We were wondering—" She saw Joni. "Well, what do we have here?" she asked, heading toward her sister-in-law. Joni was sitting on a stool eating a ham and cheese sandwich. As Sammy approached her, she set the sandwich aside and turned to face her sister-in-law. Her robe was open and Sammy reached up to close it. Joni laughed. "Too late for modesty, sis. He's already seen everything." "In fact, Never mind," Sammy said. I left the room and went upstairs to get dressed. When I came back, they were still discussing my bedspread. When they saw that I was dressed, they fell silent. The following weekend, Dwight and Sammy asked Joni to watch Sarah while the 2 of them went out to dinner. We were in the backyard watching Sarah in her sandbox. Without looking at Joni, I said, "She's a beautiful child, isn't she?" "Yes, she is." "Did you know she was adopted?" "Really?" "Yes. They've had her since she was born. According to the adoption agency, the birth mother was married, had an affair with a man she doesn't even remember, and got pregnant. Her husband was in the military. She didn't want him to find out about her affair, so she gave Sarah up for adoption. Dwight and Sammy were there to take her home. Sarah is the name her own mother gave her. No, that name was Hope. It's on the birth certificate. But Sammy and Dwight changed it. Sarah suits her better. What happened to the birth mother and her husband? I have no idea. The adoption agency closes their files very tightly. They don't give the birth mother access to information about the adoptive family and vice versa. Sarah came over and wanted to sit on Joni's lap. She leaned her head against Joni's and fell asleep almost immediately. A few minutes later, Joni asked me to carry Sarah into the bedroom and put her to bed. It was my first time touching her, and I felt very uncomfortable. I gladly laid her down. 7 months later, Joni moved in with me. A year after that, we were married. We had a very happy year until the Army intervened. We were told we were being sent to Germany for 3 years of service. We took 2 trips to the States, one when her father and Dwight's father died, and the other for the reunion. Both times, of course, we saw Dwight and Sammy. We saw Sarah at the funeral. But when we went back for the reunion, she was at camp. After 3 years, we received orders to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was going as a new LTC assigned to the post headquarters as an executive officer under the post commander. This was normally a position for a colonel, not a junior lieutenant colonel, but I didn't mind. In the military world, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. To help me get settled in the staff, organized a series of briefings with the various departments that support the post. One of the briefings was to be given by a postal engineer. Representatives from that department, as well as the postal engineer himself, were already in the conference room when I arrived. I sat down in my seat at the table and watched as a blue-eyed civilian stood up to begin his speech. His hair was slightly blonde, but with a touch of gray. He introduced himself as Kurt Weber. I just stared at him. He had been talking for an hour, and I hadn't heard a word, and my gaze never left his face. It was obvious that he was uncomfortable with me looking at him. At the end of his speech, he asked if I had any questions. "Tell me, Mr. Weber, have you ever been to Fort Hood?" "Yes, sir. I was in the engineering department." "Did you like it there?" "Yes, sir." "Why did you leave?" "It's rather personal, sir." "You are correct. I withdraw the question. I just like to know about the people I work with. I seem to recall a scandal at the Fort Hood Engineering Department a few years ago. Do you know anything about that?" "I vaguely recall something about one thing. There was someone cheating, if I remember correctly." "Ah, well, I just remembered something. Thanks for the briefing. If you need anything at headquarters, feel free to contact me, just in case you forgot." I pointed to the name tag on my uniform. "My name is Sadler, S-A-D-L-A-R. Fred Sadler. I wouldn't want you to forget it." I was still looking straight into his eyes, and I could see the light bulb turn on, and his eyes get huge. Kurt Weber became several different colors, ranging from red to pale gray. I got up and walked away. In the afternoon, I learned that Mr. Kurt Weber had requested a transfer. Unfortunately for him, this request had to go through me. When I received it the next day, I wrote in large letters, "Response: I have plans that involve Mr. Weber's expertise. He will play a key role in the realization of these plans." The next day, to the surprise of almost everyone, Mr. Kurt Weber tendered his immediate resignation. I signed it. Every day, I fell more and more in love with Joni. I watched her become increasingly beautiful and hot. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and saw an aging, middle-aged man, wondering what she saw in me. But whatever it was, I was grateful for it. We cherished our time together, and years flew by much faster than I wanted. We were stationed in Alaska and traveled to Killeen to visit Sammy and Dwight. On our first evening, they told us about a decision they had made with Sarah, who was almost 18. She had always known she was adopted and was now interested in finding her biological parents. Dwight and Sammy supported her decision, but the adoption agency offered no help, citing compliance with the law. All we heard that first day was how outdated the laws were and how they needed reform, especially since it's important for an adopted child to know their birth parents' health status. They decided to use a website dedicated to DNA and ancestry. They sent Sarah's DNA and waited to see what happened. Sarah hoped her biological mother could attend her high school graduation, but since it was only a couple of weeks away, they doubted it would happen. That night, Joni and I were already in bed when she asked, "What are you going to do?" "About what?" "About Sarah." "What about her?" "Come on, Fred. Married couples don't have secrets, or shouldn't have any. I found your little file 6 months after we were married. She can avoid DNA testing if you tell them everything you know." "Oh, crap," I said. "Yeah, oh crap, why have you been silent all these years?" "I'm not sure. I guess I knew how sensitive you'd be about it. And Dwight and Sammy didn't need to know, so I kept quiet, but now it's become important and you have to address it. Any suggestions on how I can do this?" "Just Tell the story, I suppose. How do you think they'll take it? Dwight is my brother, and just like me, so he'll take it. Normally, Sammy is the dark horse. Okay, tomorrow. We'll get Sarah out of the house and tell them. She leaned over and kissed me gently. Do I ever bore you? She asked. What a silly question, I said. Of course you don't. Why did you even ask? Because you haven't touched me all day. I grinned and reached for the buttons on her pajamas. I can fix that right now. The next morning was Sunday. Sarah was picked up by her best friend and they went to the mall. I gathered the four of us around the table, took a deep breath, and began. I started by telling them that Joni and I had packed our things before we went downstairs, so we were ready if they wanted to kick us out. They looked at us, and Joni shrugged. Sarah doesn't need to give DNA to find her biological parents. I know who they are, I said. The looks they gave me made it clear I needed to explain, so I told them the whole story. When I finished, I took a deep breath and looked around the table. Dwight just stared at me, while Sammy had tears in her eyes. After a few seconds, she stood up, walked over to me, took my hands, pulled me into a hug, and said, "Oh, poor guy. Living with that all these years and not being able to talk about it. No one deserves that." She hugged me again. "What do you think, Dwight?" she asked her husband. "I'm trying to calculate the probability of how we all ended up together. I don't think there's a big enough number." "So what do we do now?" asked Sammy, returning to her chair. "I think Fred should contact his ex-wife and invite her to the prom since Sarah wants her there," Joni said. "Yeah? Why me?" I protested. "Because you started it," Dwight grinned. "But who's going to contact Weber?" "Not me," I said, and told them about the last time I saw him. "You never told me that," Joni said. "I didn't realize you knew the whole story." Did I? She leaned over and kissed me. I love this woman, I thought. Later that day, when Sarah returned, Dwight and Sammy told her about it. She was both nervous and excited and wanted us to continue. The only way I knew to contact Lydia was through her parents, if they were still alive, if they still lived in Mechanicsburg, and if they still had a landline. I waited until Monday morning and talked to a private investigator. I asked him to help me find Lydia's parents and Kurt Weber. It took him 2 hours to get the parents' phone number. It took longer to find Weber. I called Lydia's parents, reminded them who I was, and told them I needed to talk to Lydia. I gave them my phone number to give to her. Not an hour later, my phone rang. "Hello, this is Lydia Bowman. I was given this number." "Hi, Lydia." "Fred?" "Yeah." "How's it going?" I asked, trying to think of something clever to say, but I couldn't. "Actually, I'm doing great. How are you?" "Very well. Lydia, I need to talk to you about something very important." "Okay, go ahead. Not over the phone. Tell me where we can meet, and we'll talk in person." "Explain it to me. We haven't spoken in years, and suddenly, out of the blue, you have something so important that it needs to be discussed in person." "That's it." "I'm sorry, Fred, I'm not buying it." "Okay, but remember I gave you a chance." "A chance at what?" "Come on, Fred, what's the matter?" "Only in person, Lydia. Call me if you change your mind." Wait, okay. Damn it. We live in Vegas." "That's better. I'm flying out there tomorrow, and I'll call you when I land. You decide where you want to meet." The next day, we met in the lobby of the Bellagio Hotel. I guess she needed a lot of witnesses. "Hi, Lydia." "Hello, Fred. This is my husband, Roland Bowman." "Hi, Roland." I turned my attention back to Lydia. "I need to see you alone for 10 seconds. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Roland." "Whatever you say. But this is about the hope you had." She turned pale. "Can we still talk?" "Yes, he knows about her." "Okay, let's sit down." We found as quiet a corner as we could. Given where we were, I recommended something to drink. "Wine will do." We agreed to a red, and I ordered it. "Let's wait while we get some poured into our glasses." I paid for the wine, and we all took a sip. "Her name is Sarah. She's graduating in 2 weeks and wants you to be there." Roland and I watched her faint with a glass of wine in her hand, not spilling a drop. Roland took the glass, set it down, and patted her cheeks until she came to. "What did you say?" I repeated it. Then I pulled out Sarah's picture and showed it to Lydia. She started crying, gently touching the picture. "She's beautiful. Where did you get this?" "I took it yesterday in her living room." "You took it? How? Why?" I told her the whole story from beginning to end, including our failed attempt to find Kurt Weber. She didn't know I knew his name and was shocked again. Initially stunned, she quickly grew really angry. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you keep her from me all these years?" Her voice got louder and louder. Roland jumped up. Calm down. Calm down. You gave up all rights to her. Fred is breaking the law by doing this now, so chill out. She calmed down. When can I see her? At her graduation if you want to come. Of course I'll come. Can't I see her sooner? You both need time to get used to it. Take your time. How about we get there the day before? She smiled. That would be wonderful. Now, how about I take a picture of you so she can see what you look like? Okay. We found a spot outside for her to pose. When I started to leave, she rushed over, hugged me, and kissed my face and head. Not too demonstrative, is she? Asked Roland, laughing. I decided I liked him. That same afternoon, I flew back to prepare Sarah. I showed her a picture of Lydia. She's beautiful, Sarah said. She was very nervous but excited at the same time. For the first time since I'd known her, she hugged me. Thank you, Uncle Fred. Now we know where you get your beauty, said Sammy, snuggling tightly against Sarah. Do you know what my birth father looks like? Sarah asked timidly. The other 3 adults looked at me with widened eyes, waiting to see what I would say. I thought for a moment before I spoke. Let me tell you that you got your blonde hair and blue eyes from him. The 3 adults breathed a sigh of relief. We had only taken a week's vacation, so I had to go back to Alaska, but Joni stayed behind to help everyone prepare for the big day. I left for Alaska, promising to be back 2 days before graduation. The day before I was due back in Killeen, I got a call from a private detective. The most he'd been able to find out about Weber was that after leaving government service, he'd taken a job as a consultant to the government of a Middle Eastern country. Like several other American consultants, he disappeared shortly after arriving in country and has not been seen since. I met Lydia and Roland at the airport and drove them straight to Sarah's house. When we entered, she was standing in the middle of the living room. I let Lydia go first. They looked at each other for a long time. Then Lydia spoke. I brought you this, she said, pulling out a pacifier. It belongs to you, and I thought you might want it back. Flo, or Florence, was my spouse. I'm Jim. We met in college and tied the knot shortly after graduating. Our life together followed the usual path of husband and wife, with kids, a home, and a mortgage. Flo stayed home to care for our children until they grew up. Then she went back to her career in real estate. Flo's an attractive woman, and I reckon she faces some teasing at work from time to time. But as far as I know, she's stayed loyal to me and our marriage. She's got a bit of a naughty sense of humor sometimes, which I reckon might have caused some trouble in our marriage. We had 2 kids, a boy named Eric and a girl named Patty. When this all went down, Eric was 21 and had finished vocational school. He had his own place nearby and worked as an electrician. Patty was 19 and studying at a state university about 150 miles away. With the kids out of the picture, we looked ahead to a happy retirement, hoping for some travel and hopefully grandchildren to spoil. Our bed life was what I'd consider normal. We had a loving relationship that grew over our years together. Initially, we were physical engaged almost every night and on weekends. But over time, it tapered to a couple times a week, which was fine by me, but seemed to diminish Flo's interest too. Over time, I've mastered pushing all the right buttons to bring Flo to her peak. Yet nearly every scenario comes with a snag. Ours arrived in the form of a new neighbor. About 5 years back, Roger and his wife Alice moved in next door, and we struck up a friendship. The issue with Roger was his love for pranks. He'd pull them on anyone he could. Much to my dismay, I often found myself on the receiving end. What bothered me even more was Flo's enjoyment of his antics, especially when they targeted me. I tried explaining my discomfort to her, even joining in at times, but she didn't listen or back down. With time, I noticed Roger's interest in Flo, suspecting he harbored desires beyond mere friendship. Whenever we were together, he and Flo shared laughs over his sometimes crude jokes, leaving Alice and me to politely smile at their antics in public. I could tell Alice felt as disheartened as I did about their behavior. I vividly recall one day at the beach when Roger mocked some boaters passing by, and to my dismay, Flo joined in. Alice and I were stunned by their recklessness, but our reprimands fell on deaf ears as they laughed uproariously together. Right before the conclusion, I started sensing things spiraling out of hand. We were over at Roger and Alice's place, with Alice and I chilling in the backyard while Flo went inside with Roger to help grab drinks. We chatted for a bit until we realized they'd been gone for a while. Concerned, we headed indoors to find them. In the kitchen, We found no one, but as we began searching, they strolled out of the living room, arms wrapped around each other, giggling away. Roger sported lipstick smudges on his collar and around his mouth, while Flo's lipstick was askew and her hair tousled. Alice and I stood there, mouths agape, utterly taken aback. "Hey, guys. Sorry for the delay on drinks. Got caught up showing Flo my artwork," Roger said, seemingly oblivious to their appearance. Alice and I remained rooted in shock, stunned by their brazen display. "Roger's got some amazing prints. You know what I mean, right, Alice?" Flo chimed in with a smirk. At that point, I'd gathered my thoughts and finally spoke up. "What's happening here?" I directed at Flo. "Why does Roger have lipstick all over him and you look like you've been kissed?" "Oh, that's because I got really into admiring Roger's engravings. I guess I got carried away. You're not mad, are you?" she asked, trying to maintain a composed demeanor. As I studied their expressions, it dawned on me. Roger had that smirk he gets when he's about to pull one of his jokes, and Flo was avoiding my gaze, struggling not to burst into laughter. My irritation flared. Alice, still unaware, chimed in at last. "What's happening, Roger? If you think you can carry on with another woman in our home, you better think again." As Roger and Flo erupted into laughter, I think Alice caught on and smiled sheepishly, but I couldn't contain my anger. One of these days you two will push it too far, and it won't end well. "Oh, lighten up, darling. It's just a prank. If you could see how you both looked, you'd find it funny too," Flo said between laughs. "Come on, guys. Let me fix you a drink and we can all laugh this off," Roger chimed in, strolling into the kitchen, with Flo trailing behind, still giggling. Alice and I simply shrugged and trailed after them, shaking our heads in disgust. "One day, Alice, they're going to push it too far," I reiterated. "One of these days, their pranks will backfire and someone will get hurt." Alice nodded in agreement. That night, when we returned home, I could tell Flo sensed my lingering anger, especially regarding her role in the prank. "I'm really sorry, honey," she said. "I just got carried away. Nothing serious happened. I just smeared some lipstick on him and messed up his hair. We never expected you guys to be upset. We were about to call it off when you and Alice finally showed up. Are you still mad? It was just a joke." "I'm trying not to be, Flo, but you have to stop getting involved in Roger's pranks. I nearly had a heart attack seeing you look like you were kissing him. You know how important loyalty is to me." "I understand, honey. I value loyalty just as much and would never do anything to hurt you. Just please remember that, okay? Give me a passionate kiss and forgive me," she pleaded. A couple of weeks later, we were back at Roger and Alice's for dinner on Saturday night. Just as we finished eating, a call came in that Roger mistakenly thought was for Alice. Alice worked as an ER nurse at a local hospital. After he hung up, he turned to Alice. "It's the ER. There's been a bad car wreck and they need you there ASAP. Ah, damn. Let me change and head out." 10 minutes later, Alice was on her way to the hospital. Once she'd left, Roger turned to me and asked if I could lend a hand with a project in his basement. While I helped, Flo remained silent, avoiding eye contact. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but later it struck me. "What do you need?" I asked, getting up to join him downstairs. "I need you to hold something for me while I fix it to the ceiling. It's not too heavy, but I can't hold it up and attach it at the same time, and Alice is too short for this." "Sure, sounds straightforward." "Trust me, it is. It'll only take a minute." As we descended the stairs, he directed me to a metal support post near the stove on the floor above. He took a small metal box with a power cord hanging from it off his workbench and hoisted it up to the ceiling between the support post and the furnace. I noticed Flo had followed us down and was watching with a smile. Again, I didn't think much of her presence or her odd grin. "Now, I need you to hold this while I attach it," Roger instructed. "What's this for?" I questioned, lifting my hands to grasp the box. With Roger between the pipe and the furnace, I had to wrap my hands around the pipe to press the box against the basement ceiling. "I'll explain in a sec, but let me grab my tools first." He vanished behind his desk, leaving me holding the box. He returned moments later, and I didn't see what he had until I felt 2 quick clicks as something hard and metallic closed around my wrists. Suddenly, I realized I'd been tricked. I was handcuffed to the pipe. Shocked, I turned to see Roger putting his arm around Flo's waist. As they looked at me, my mind raced, but I managed to demand, "What's going on, Roger? Get these damn cuffs off!" "Sorry, buddy, can't do that. Flo's so fond of my prints, she wants another look. But this time, we don't need you or Alice around," he explained, as he and Flo ascended the basement steps. Flo exaggeratedly swayed her hips as they left. "Let me loose. This is going too far, Roger. You'll regret it if you don't release me right now." Relax, dear. I just want to admire some engravings, Flo chuckled as they disappeared, leaving me struggling with the handcuffs. As I tried to free myself, I realized the hopelessness of my situation. The pipe was anchored in the concrete floor below and secured to a steel I-beam overhead. As I strained to hear, I sensed their movement into the master bedroom directly above me, accompanied by Flo's excited giggles. Shoes thudded onto the carpet above, and I heard hurried whispers urging the removal of garments. "Brian, I desire you greatly," Flo whispered urgently. My fury mounted as I continued to frantically struggle with the handcuffs. Above, the bed began to creak, and I imagined them engaging in closeness. I cursed the restraints and my disloyal wife overhead. My wrists grew raw and bloody from my relentless efforts. Emotions churned within me as Roger grunted and Flo moaned in unison. Then, silence blanketed the upstairs for a brief moment. Ceasing my struggles, I lay on the unforgiving cement floor, hands clasped around the pipe. A profound sadness settled in my heart as Flo exclaimed, "That was amazing, Roger. I'll have to admire your work again someday. Let's dress and check on Jim downstairs." "Sure, Flo, I need a breather. But Alice might return soon from that phony call I made, and I'd rather she not find us in bed together." Minutes later, footsteps echoed on the basement stairs, but I didn't lift my gaze as they neared my prone form. Oh, damn, look at his wrists all bloody," Flo gasped. "Honey, it was just a prank. Nothing happened. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. Roger, hurry and unlock the cuffs so we can tend to his wrists. Oh, God, I never thought he'd take it this hard." Tears streamed down my face as Roger fumbled with the handcuff key. "Roger, hand Flo the key before you unlock me and run. Once I'm free, you'll regret ever being born," I warned, glaring at him. He met my gaze, wordlessly passing the key to Flo. As he edged toward the stairs, fear flickered in his eyes, while Flo began unlocking the handcuffs. Once the cuffs were off, I heard Roger's truck revving up, tires screeching as he peeled away. Rising to my feet, I peered down at Flo, still crouched on the floor, fear etched across her face. "You better find somewhere else to stay tonight or I could seriously hurt you. Call before you attempt to come home." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she grasped the magnitude of the pain she'd caused. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. It was just a prank. We didn't do anything." "Flo, I don't want to hear excuses about it being a joke ever again. To me, it's as if you cheated. And that's all that matters now. From here on out, I'll treat it as infidelity and betrayal. Expect a call from my lawyer soon." "We're finished," I declared, turning and ascending the stairs. "No, Jim, please, nothing happened," she cried out from the basement. "What do I tell the kids?" I didn't respond, heading toward the front door. Just as I was getting into my car, a frantic Alice pulled into their driveway. "Where the hell is my lousy husband? There was no accident, and I didn't need an ambulance," she exclaimed as she stepped out of the car. Suddenly, she noticed my wrists. "What happened, Jim? Dear God, look at your wrists. Let me bandage them for you." Roger and Flo pulled another stunt, I sighed. "Alice, they've crossed the line this time. I'm divorcing Flo." "Oh God, what happened?" "You'll hear it from Flo and Roger. I'm heading home to take care of my wounds. Once there, you can inform my cheating ex-wife that she'll find her belongings on the porch. If she wants back in, she'll need a court order." "Oh God, what did they do?" Alice wailed, rushing into the house in distress. I climbed into my car, my anger simmering. Arriving home, I cleansed my wrists with antibacterial soap, applied ointment, and bandaged them. Methodically, I packed Flo's belongings into plastic bags, placing them outside. Ignoring the ringing phone, I focused on the task. After locking up, I undressed and lay on the bed, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. In the morning, the phone rang again, but I declined to answer. After showering and eating breakfast, I changed my bandages. Around 10 o'clock, the doorbell chimed, and I peered out to find Alice on the doorstep. Inviting her in, I gestured for her to enter. "They really went too far this time, didn't they?" she remarked as she stepped inside. "Unfortunately, yes," I replied. "What's your plan?" she inquired. "As I told her, I'm filing for divorce. Yet they claim nothing happened. Just another one of their jokes." "Flo really wants to talk to you," Alice mentioned. "My perception is that they did it, and as far as I'm concerned, that's reality. I'll schedule a meeting with a divorce attorney first thing Monday," I responded calmly. "You're incredibly upset, aren't you? Can't you wait until you've cooled off before making such a drastic decision? You've invested nearly 24 years in each other. Don't you want to salvage anything?" she reasoned. "I won't tolerate being betrayed. I've warned Flo numerous times, and in my eyes, she betrayed me. It's over," I declared. But they insist nothing actually happened. They just made it seem that way, Alice argued. Their words are not proof. It felt as though it could have happened, I explained, and they can't prove it didn't happen. So I have to trust my perception that it did. She showed no respect for me, I stated firmly. Can't you hold off and seek counseling? Flo's devastated by this, Alice pleaded. I warned her before, but she didn't listen, I retorted. I've said my piece. Let the lawyer handle it. If you're content with Roger's involvement, that's your choice. But he better steer clear of me, I concluded. I haven't decided what to do about Roger yet, but I hate to see our friendship end over this. Roger feels genuinely sorry and wants me to pass on his sincere apologies to you. Make it clear that our friendship is over, I insisted. Although I'd like to stay friends, Alice, I think it's best if we don't see each other while you're still with him. Is there anything I can tell Flo to give her hope for your forgiveness? If she can prove she didn't sleep with Roger, I'll consider it. I don't trust Roger or her word that it was just a joke. I feel like it happened, and that's enough for me. Okay, Jim, I'll let her know. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too, Alice. Let me load Flo's things into your car so you can take them to her. I assume you still have it. She's moving in with her sister this afternoon. Her sister lives on the other side of town. She's a widow and lives alone, so there's space for Flo, maybe indefinitely. After loading Flo's belongings into Alice's car, I waved her off, then returned to the house. First, I looked up a locksmith to change the locks. It occurred to me that if I went to work on Monday and Flo changed the locks, I'd end up locked out. I arranged for the locksmith to come the same day. Then I unplugged my phone and switched off my cell. I dedicated the entire day to household chores until the locksmith's arrival. Once he departed, I hopped into my car and made a trip to the local supermarket, stocking up on a few frozen dinners to sustain me for about a week. Upon returning to my now solitary home, I couldn't shake the absence of Flo after nearly 24 years together. However, my anger towards her and what she, along with Roger, had done, lingered. Around 7:30 that evening, while watching TV, the doorbell chimed. Peering out the window, I spotted Flo's sister Mary at the doorstep. "Hello, Mary," I greeted as I opened the door for her. "Hi, Jim. Can I have a moment of your time?" "Of course, Mary. Come on in," I welcomed. We proceeded to the living room where she settled into a seat while I asked if she wanted a drink. "A Coca-Cola would be fine," she requested. After fetching the drinks, I returned to the living room. "I suppose you know why I'm here?" she began after taking a sip. "Yes. Are you here to plead for her return?" "If so, you've come in vain," I responded bluntly. "No, she confided in me about everything." "How are your wrists?" she inquired. "They're healing, scabbing over. No signs of infection," I informed her. "Flo will be relieved to hear that," Mary remarked. "She's on the brink of a breakdown, particularly because you refuse to speak with her. That's why I'm here, to deliver a message. Or rather, a few messages," she continued. "Very well, I'll hear your messages, but I can't promise anything in return," I stated. "Firstly, she loves you deeply and regrets her actions," Mary conveyed. "All right. Anything else?" I prompted. "She wants you to know she's willing to undergo a lie detector test to prove she's telling the truth. It's the only proof she can offer that nothing happened with Roger or anyone else," Mary disclosed. This proposition was a novel idea I hadn't considered. I pondered it for a moment while Mary observed me, sipping her cola. "It sounds typical, but I have conditions. Firstly, proof that she didn't sleep with Roger doesn't guarantee reconciliation. Secondly, Roger must also undergo the same test, with matching results. Thirdly, I require approval from the test administrator for questions. Lastly, I won't cover the test expenses." "That seems fair, Jim, but wouldn't you consider reconciliation more if the tests prove their honesty?" "No, she deeply wounded me. Even if I decide to take her back, it will take a long time to forgive her," I asserted. "Understood, Jim. I'll convey your terms to her. I'm truly sorry. I intended to be furious with her for her foolishness when she came by this afternoon. However, she looked so distressed that I doubt anything I could say would worsen her state. She's aware of her grave mistake and the pain she's caused you. I'll give her some sleeping pills to help her rest tonight. Also, she contacted your children and confessed her actions. They seemed upset with her as she hasn't stopped crying since speaking with them. I should return to deliver your message. Thanks for the cola." "No problem, Mary. I appreciate your concern." After her departure, I reflected on the situation. Some of my initial rage had subsided, allowing me to think more clearly about my desires. I decided to have a drink first, heading to my office where the drinks cabinet stood. Pouring myself half a glass of scotch, I added an ice cube in the kitchen. Without returning to my seat, I wandered the house, reminiscing about our shared married life. Did I truly want to end it all? My contemplation was interrupted by the doorbell ringing. Peering out the window, I spotted our daughter Patty standing at the front door, visibly discontent. Oh, I thought she might have realized the locks were changed and her key didn't work. Upon opening the door, Patty strode inside, casting me a hostile glance. What's up with the locks, Dad? And why are you ignoring calls? I had to drive 150 miles to get some answers. Sorry, Patty. I didn't mean to avoid talking to your mother. I heard from Aunt Mary that she briefed you on what happened. Yeah? And I'm really upset with you for kicking her out just because of a joke. Can't you forgive her and let her come home? When she phoned me to disclose her actions, I realized she acted foolishly. Patty, it transcended mere humor. I had previously cautioned her about the pranks she and Roger engaged in, but she disregarded my warnings. I couldn't glean much from Mom during our phone conversation, but I gathered it was intended as a jest. What could be so objectionable about that? I elaborated on the events, starting with the earlier lipstick smudge prank and our ensuing conversations. Then I recounted the more serious joke, revealing the scars on my wrists by rolling up my sleeves. Daddy, this is awful. Is that when you asked her to leave? Yes, it seemed like they might have had lovemaking. It sounded just like they described, and I know your mom's bedroom noises. Either that or they're exceptional actors. I believe they did it. That's my reality, unless she proves otherwise. I suggested your mom take a lie detector test, and Roger too. If the results prove true, I'll have to trust her. But it hurt deeply that she thought I'd find being betrayed a joke. I might not be able to reconcile with her. I'm really sorry about all this, Dad. I hope you and your mom can work through it because I love you both, despite what she did. I'm trying to make it work, baby, because I miss your mom dearly, but I'm still struggling with her lack of respect for me. Okay, Daddy, I understand now that I know what happened. I'm going to visit Mom and try to calm her down. I'll probably stay at Aunt Mary's tonight, and I have to return to school tomorrow. Please turn on your phone so I can reach you. Eric also wants to talk to you. He's working upstate and tried to call you after Mom contacted him. Sure, baby. I'll switch the phones back on once you're gone. Come here for a hug. I embraced her tightly, feeling how much she resembled her mother, which was both comforting and unsettling. I cherished her deeply. She'd always been my little girl. Goodbye, Daddy, she said, opening her car door. I waved as she drove off, then returned inside, resuming my solitary drink and turning my phones back on. A couple of days after Flo's sister Mary visited, she called to inform me that Flo had agreed to my terms for the lie detector test, and Roger had also consented. Roger offered to cover the cost of his test as a sign of remorse for his involvement in the prank. Mary also provided me with the contact information for the testing administrator. My anger towards Flo for her involvement in the prank had somewhat subsided, but I felt deeply despondent. If she truly loved me and hadn't been physically engaged with Roger, how could she participate in such a humiliating joke? I began to entertain the possibility that her love for me had waned, despite her claims of wanting reconciliation. It boiled down to whether I was willing to endure a loveless marriage if tests confirmed no carnal involvement. Flo attempted to reach out to me multiple times, but I promptly ended the calls upon hearing her voice. Subsequently, her sister acted as an intermediary, relaying Flo's apologies and desires to reconcile. However, I maintained my stance, insisting on awaiting the results of the lie detector tests before making any decisions. During this period, our son Eric fervently urged me to forgive his mother and allow her to return home. Despite my efforts to explain the situation and the hurt her actions caused, he struggled to comprehend my pain and persisted in his plea for her return. I realized that our relationship could become strained if we ended up divorcing. Thankfully, our daughter Patty showed more empathy and support for my situation. After Mary provided me with the test administrator's contact details, I reached out to legal and law enforcement acquaintances for insights. Reassured by their recommendations, I scheduled an appointment with the administrator, confident in his ability to conduct an impartial test. The following day, I discovered that Flo and Roger had already contacted the test administrator, Jack Harlan, and scheduled tests for both of them in 2 days. They designated me as an interested party authorized to control the questions asked. I informed my boss the next day about needing personal time and visited Jack Harlan's office. After explaining the situation to him, We discussed the questions he would pose to determine whether Flo and Roger had engaged in carnal activity. Jack assured me that he would ask the same questions to both parties, compile their responses, and provide a final written report. He agreed that matching test results from both would confirm no carnal activity. Had this not been the outcome, trust in Flo might have been irreparable, leading to inevitable divorce if the tests indicated lying. Returning to work, I felt more assured that clarity regarding any carnal involvement would soon emerge. Yet I acknowledged challenging decisions lay ahead. Over the next 3 days, I adhered to my usual work routine, staying late to avoid returning to an empty home. Evening meals were taken at a nearby diner, followed by whiskey at home, where sleep was elusive. The absence of Flo's warmth and love weighed heavily on me. Before the morning of the test, uncertainty lingered. However, a clear lie detector report would pave the way for Flo's return, with the assurance that she'd refrain from any more insensitive pranks, especially after seeing how deeply the last one affected me. The tranquility lasted until the phone rang just after 11. It was Alice. "Jim, it's Alice. I found something important. Roger's at the testing center. Can you come now?" Her tone sounded ominous, prompting me to rush next door. Following our usual routine, I entered through the front door and heard Alice's voice from the office. Inside, I found her at her desktop computer, wearing a concerned expression. "Jim, I need you to see this." I pulled up a chair beside her. "Jim, Roger's been acting secretive since Tuesday. A couple of times I caught him quickly minimizing something on the monitor when I passed by this door. Also, he tends to leave the room when he's on the phone. I'm pretty sure he spoke to Flo yesterday. This is my first chance to check our computer without him around." With that, Alice clicked on the Google icon, revealing his search history since Tuesday. My blood ran cold as I scanned through some of the research. There were 4 different searches on how to beat a lie detector test. Alice and I sat side by side, reading through many of the pages her husband had browsed. After digesting enough, we retreated to her living room to discuss our findings. Our conversation continued until we heard Roger's car pull up outside. As he entered and greeted us with a wary look, he took a seat on the couch opposite Alice and me. If I hadn't been observant, I might have missed the slight limp as he favored his left leg. "This was all the reassurance I needed, Roger. I believe you passed the test with flying colors. Honestly, I had a hunch nothing untoward happened that day," I remarked. Catching Alice's puzzled glance out of the corner of my eye, I realized I hadn't shared my plan with her yet. I spoke up. "If you promise that you and Flo will never pull another stunt like this again, I'm willing to let bygones be bygones and shake hands. Perhaps even skip reading the report altogether." Relief washed over his face as he readily gave his word. With a smile, I rose from my seat and approached him. As he extended his right hand, I took a step closer, firmly planting my foot on his right leg. The expected discomfort failed to register. Instead, his face drained of color as he let out a piercing scream, collapsing back onto the couch. Frantically, he used both hands to free his foot from under mine, eventually tearing off his shoe. Alice and I watched as the shoe came off, revealing blood-soaked socks. He continued to groan in pain. Glancing sideways at Alice, I saw her discomfort at the sight of blood. Keeping my gaze on her, I smiled as I noticed her realization, connecting our earlier reading with the wound on Roger's leg. "I won't bother with the report because I know it'll be nonsense. Did you nail your shoe to press on it while answering their security questions, trying to mask your lies?" "It had to backfire eventually, didn't it? Trying to induce sweat and a faster heart rate with harmless questions, making the results appear truthful," I concluded. The anguish on Roger's face softened slightly, giving way to a look of despair as he glanced between me and Alice. "Yeah, I did cheat, and I showed Flo how to do it, but not for the reason you're thinking. Seriously, man," he confessed. "All right, Alice, brace yourself," I remarked as we both resumed our seats, and Roger gently applied pressure to his sole to staunch the bleeding. Observing Alice's disapproving expression at the mess on the floor, I briefly entertained the thought of suggesting that she make him clean the carpet with his tongue. To his credit, Roger remained silent, offering no attempt to dramatize this new revelation. "We didn't know what questions you posed to the examiner. What's so complicated about asking if we had lovemaking?" I interjected. "Sure, we probably would have aced that one, but we were concerned you'd delve into something more subtle." "Like what?" I prodded further. "Well, has our conduct always aligned with the standards of a marital relationship?" Roger began, but before he could finish, Alice interjected angrily, indicating an obvious negative response to that query. Why else would you go to the trouble of sticking a damn nail in your shoe before the test? I pressed on. I'm guessing the fact that you arrived with the nail still lodged inside means you forgot to bring extra shoes or a pair of pliers. Planning ahead has never been your strong suit, has it? I added, addressing Alice as I spoke. Please, honey, I didn't want to lose you, Roger pleaded. And Flo certainly didn't want to lose Jim. So, dear husband, when and what did you do that wouldn't measure up to the standards of a marriage? Alice inquired, her tone stern. Roger shifted uncomfortably in his chair and responded in a subdued voice. It was that day we pretended to be fooling around upstairs. We were just jumping on the bed. As you can imagine, we were both fully clothed. He hurriedly clarified, explaining, we were bouncing on the bed, causing it to squeak. I can't even recall who initiated it, but somehow we began touching each other through our clothes. We both found it enjoyable. We were incredibly foolish. I felt a bit puzzled. I pride myself on being a good judge of character, and this rings true. If not, Roger is exceptionally skilled at conjuring excuses on the spot. I glanced at Alice. Is this satisfactory? I asked. Not even close, she retorted. This pair has demonstrated such proficiency in deception and scheming that I am far from convinced, Alice continued. Roger, tend to your leg, apply some antiseptic, bandage it, and then I suggest you leave. I need time to contemplate. Plus, there's the matter of cleaning up yet another one of your messes, Alice snapped, indicating a stain on the carpet near Roger's foot. Despite Roger's acting skills, the look of dread on his face betrayed his deep concern about the fate of his marriage. I have a video, Alice, he blurted out suddenly. What? I exclaimed simultaneously. We sounded like a twisted duet. I installed a camera in our bedroom before we handcuffed you in the basement. I captured everything, Roger confessed before I could react. Then why the hell didn't you mention this a few days ago? I demanded. Roger didn't need to respond to that question. If the video depicted them pleasuring each other even while fully clothed, it wouldn't be something two spouses eager to reconcile with their partners would want to share publicly. Personally, I strongly believe that the boundary of infidelity extends far beyond actual physical act. Any form of closeness, including a simple kiss on the lips, would constitute crossing a line that should not be crossed. I had the intention to do so, but Flo feared your reaction. We instructed Roger to tend to his leg, and then present us with the video. While Roger was out of the room, I sent Flo a message. I couldn't resist adding to her already mounting anxiety. Remove the nail from your shoe and come over to Alice's house. Roger is going to show us a video. Normally, it's just a minute's walk from Mary's house to ours, but it took a good 35 minutes before there was a knock on the door. Alice opened it and welcomed in Flo and her sister Mary. Flo's makeup was smudged, and her eyes were teary. Mary explained that my wife panicked as soon as she read my message, realizing that I had caught on to her little scheme. Flo appeared far less composed about the test results than Roger did upon his return home. Mary simply glanced at me and raised her eyebrows at Flo's further self-destructive behavior. Flo attempted to embrace me, but I guided her to sit beside me on the couch. She kept studying my expression, seemingly trying to gauge my feelings. I wondered if Mary had any inkling about the contents of the video. Alice and I didn't waste time during those 35 minutes. Our discussion centered around what our likely course of action would be if the video indeed confirmed Roger's claims. Alice had already made up her mind that she would likely forgive Roger for the bedroom incident, albeit after letting him stew for a bit. As for me, I was more conflicted. My initial emotional reaction was that my wife had betrayed me, something I had always deemed unforgivable. However, my logical reasoning was more composed. Flo had been an exemplary wife for 24 years, and our children had made it abundantly clear that they would be devastated if I didn't forgive her. A minute after everyone settled in, Roger arrived with his laptop. A USB flash drive protruded from one port while a cable emerged from the other. He positioned the computer next to the TV and powered it up. I found it odd that he didn't simply insert the flash drive directly into the TV. Then I recalled Alice's remark about his lack of tech savvy. Once the image on the computer screen synchronized with that on the TV, Roger muttered another apology and hit play. Flo kept her gaze averted from everyone in the room, including the TV. She was undoubtedly aware of my uncompromising stance on fidelity, making this an incredibly uncomfortable situation for her. Mary observed the screen intently, seemingly unaware of what was about to unfold. Roger appeared more at ease once again. He settled beside Alice and attempted to hold her hand, but she withdrew it. The clip, lasting about 10 minutes, essentially depicted what Roger had previously described. It was largely devoid of any eroticism. Within moments of its commencement, both protagonists appeared fully clothed, just as Roger had stated. Flo turned him onto his back, then positioned herself on top of him, echoing verbatim what I had heard while handcuffed in the basement. We observed that it was Roger who initiated the hand game, though Flo followed closely behind. This was incredibly difficult for me to witness for several reasons. Firstly, no man with any self-respect, apart from a few outliers, desires to witness his wife in such a scenario with another man. Secondly, it triggered painful PTSD as I relived the words that had devastated me less than a week ago. It reignited the burning and throbbing sensation in my wrists, a painful reminder of my inability to prevent what was unfolding in the room above me. Midway through, I shut my eyes tightly, attempting to block out the sounds. I didn't open them again until the room was filled with the silence that followed their shared climaxes. The silence felt deafening and all-encompassing. Even the normal sounds of breathing seemed absent within the room. I wasn't alone in my turmoil. Glancing at the screen, I saw Flo and Roger quickly separate. The video paused, revealing an empty bed before fading to black. The uncomfortable silence lingered in the room for several tense moments. Once the clip concluded, Mary cast a disgusted look at Flo, while Roger eyed Alice hopefully. Flo stared at a spot on the floor, her focus unwavering. The silence shattered when Alice abruptly rose to her feet, with Roger following suit. "You deceitful traitor," Alice's words cut through the air, shocking us all. It was the most severe thing I had ever heard her say, surpassing any prior expletives. Roger's expression betrayed his shock at her outburst. The sound of her open palm striking his cheek echoed like a fire shot. She was seething with anger. "I've never seen someone so enraged," I thought to myself, watching the scene unfold. But Alice wasn't finished. "Don't you dare touch me, you treacherous little scoundrel!" she seethed, her fury palpable. Roger dodged, narrowly avoiding a second slap. He winced, shifting his weight to his right leg, appearing bewildered. "This entire video is fabricated," he insisted. "But why? We had invited Jim and Flo over later that evening, hadn't we? We were planning to relax on the patio, right?" Alice's question came out more like a growl. "But due to the rain, we opted to stay indoors. Do you recall now?" Roger still seemed puzzled, but nodded along with Alice's explanation. Alice pointed angrily at the TV screen. "Look at this fool! The sunlight streaming through the window indicates it's not only a sunny day, but also morning. This window doesn't receive direct sunlight until noon. You concocted the entire story, didn't you?" Roger's expression shifted from confusion to horror. That was all the confirmation I needed of their deceit. The abrupt transition from contemplating forgiveness to a resolute decision was disorienting, and I detest feeling humiliated. I could and indeed concurred that there might be a valid reason for attempting to deceive a lie detector test. There was only one explanation. They tampered with the video. The following moments were tense. Flo let out a loud groan and fled out the door, while Mary sat there, stunned. Alice advanced towards Roger, who attempted to maneuver past me using me as a shield. I took a single stride and exerted all my force as I brought my foot down on his injured leg. Instinctively, he doubled over, and as his head reached a near-horizontal position, it met my knee coming the opposite direction, causing his head to back up, blood spraying from his flattened nose. He joined Flo in a hurried flight away from home, leaving the three of us locked in a grim tableau. Alice stood trembling, tears streaming down her face, a sentiment I could deeply relate to. For the second time in a week, the man I had loved unconditionally for nearly 25 years shattered my heart. The realization that this was the same person who had kept me hopeful between crises was doubly shocking. Mary remained seated, seemingly stunned by her sister's foolishness and likely horrified by the lies Flo undoubtedly fed her over the past week. I approached Alice and enveloped her in a hug. I held her as she trembled uncontrollably, mourning the demise of her marriage. I've always preferred to grieve in solitude, reserving it for later. But in this moment, I remained composed, clinically calm as one can be amidst chaos, already formulating a list of inquiries. I was already regretting letting Roger depart with only a broken nose. I glanced at Mary, pondering her reasons for staying. Was it to offer apologies for her role in this debacle, or was it due to her inability to tear her gaze away from the catastrophe unfolding before her? Unable to answer this without breaking my connection with Alice, which I had no intention of doing, I allowed my thoughts to race. It became apparent that Roger, while intelligent and adept at manipulation, was not as cunning as Alice. If she hadn't picked up on the sunlight clue at that moment, we might still be part of two successful couples. In hindsight, the doctored video was quite clever, yet I struggled to reconcile this with the fact that I was being deceived. I was certain that the soundtrack aligned perfectly with the words I had heard during that weekend, leading to an inevitable, logical conclusion. That certainty neatly fit into a slot in my mind, like the penultimate piece of a puzzle. They must have either overlaid the old soundtrack onto new visual footage or replicated the words and sounds in real time. Both scenarios were based on recordings made during the original incident. Suddenly, Roger's actions of playing the file through his laptop made sense. After giving Alice one final hug, I gently lowered her onto the couch and made my way to my laptop. I breathed a sigh of relief when I found it hadn't gone into sleep mode yet, which would have required a password to regain access. How silly, I chastised myself inwardly, realizing that if it had, I could have simply viewed the flash drive on another device. My mind was clearly foggy from everything that had transpired. With my fingers deftly navigating the keys and mouse, I closed the software and opened the video file displayed on the Explorer screen, revealing that we had just witnessed myself and Flo making 8. There were also files labeled 2 through 7. 2 more files caught my attention. One was titled Me and Flo Original, while the other was labeled Basement. I clicked on the latter, then scrolled along the progress bar. About 3/4 of the way through, I found myself suspended from that cursed bar in the basement, captured by an obviously hidden camera. I closed the clip, overwhelmed by the flood of unpleasant memories. The file labeled Original was significantly larger than the others. Seeing Alice's approving nod, I pressed play. It revealed a view overlooking Roger and Alice's bedroom. The perspective differed from video 8, prompting me to dash down the hallway to compare the two views. After about half a minute of detective work, I deduced that the original camera was likely concealed on a bookshelf, while subsequent versions were probably captured by a tripod-mounted camera at the foot of the bed. Upon returning to the living room, I noted that the timer at the bottom of the screen displayed 1 minute and 5 seconds, with over an hour remaining. It was evident that Roger lacked editing skills. I fast-forwarded to 20 minutes before the end, then progressed in 30-second intervals until the action began to backtrack 30 seconds. I settled onto the sofa beside Alice, clutching her hand for mutual support. Let's just say the original version differed significantly from the subsequent ones. The only commonality was that it all commenced with Flo pushing Roger onto his back. About 25 seconds later, I heard both Alice and Mary gasp simultaneously. Due to the camera angle, Flo's face came into view as she turned her head to the side, glancing down and to the left of the camera. In simpler terms, there was a grate at floor level that opened into a channel, carrying the crucial sounds of their prank to the basement below, where I was held captive. The expression on Flo's face, the one that caused the gasps, was repulsive. My wife knew precisely what I endured in the basement that night, and she relished it. My supposedly loving wife took pleasure in mentally tormenting me. I battled a strong urge to vomit. When Roger noticed where Flo's gaze was fixed on the screen, he smirked maliciously. He seemed too stunned to check the time, but a few seconds must have passed. We all observed as Roger turned Flo onto her back, kneeling beside her and fiddling with his belt and trousers. On the screen, Flo lifted her skirt and ripped off her underwear, tossing them aside. The remainder of the video unfolded pretty much as I had imagined it would during my time in the basement, with the benefit of hindsight. Flo's callous enjoyment of the situation likely emboldened Roger and triggered the subsequent chain of events. That being said, if I were a betting man, I'd wager that this was Roger and Flo's first encounter. The video certainly depicted how what began as a relatively innocent situation swiftly spiraled out of control. I was fairly certain that Roger realized he derived pleasure from witnessing someone else humiliated, but it was probable that Flo stumbled upon her kink that day. After the spectacle concluded, Mary inquired about the prospect of a future between Flo and me. Her demeanor suggested she wasn't hopeful. I paused for at least a minute to sort through my emotions. No, not in this lifetime, Mary. Ironically, if Flo had approached me later and explained that it started as a joke but escalated out of control, as it appeared in the original video, then perhaps I would have contemplated forgiveness. However, they colluded to rewrite history and outsmart the lie detector test. This level of deceit is beyond what I ever believed she was capable of. It makes me question how well I truly know her. What else has she lied to me about? Moreover, we haven't yet viewed all the workout videos. After her initial slip-up, she returned and engaged in at least one more physical, engaged in interaction with Roger. How many times did they engage in such activities during these workout sessions? Then there was the expression on her face. I'm sure you noticed it too, Mary. I'm sorry, Mary, but it's over between us. Mary nodded solemnly. Please refrain from publicly shaming her, Jim. It would only embarrass your children. If you provide me with a copy of the video, I'll calmly explain the situation to Mom and Dad, Flo, and even your children if necessary. I nodded and expressed my gratitude. She departed sadly, but with determination in her expression. Alice had already opened the phone book to the legal section. Alice and I comforted each other for weeks. However, it became evident that any relationship is destined for painful memories, and we parted as friends. I was leaving her house late one night after once again providing her with comfort when I encountered an enraged Roger in her front yard. How could he ever hope to reconcile with Alice if I was visiting her 5 times a week? What a deluded fool. Glancing around for potential witnesses, I took great satisfaction in breaking his nose once more. I felt a sense of pride in myself. The memory of that sadistic grin on his face just before he destroyed my marriage would have been provocation enough. In the divorce proceedings, Alice practically crucified him when he demanded his share of the assets. With my full approval, she threatened to press charges for unlawful restraint, using the basement video as evidence. He cut his losses and vanished soon after. That was for the best. I might have been bluffing. I could have likely endured the public humiliation, and I wasn't concerned about Flo's reputation, but I didn't want to embarrass my children or Flo's extended family. Shortly after I gave Roger a bloody nose about a week after the video incident, Flo reached out, wondering if my decision not to share the video with her kids, family, and friends indicated a chance for us in the future. Her message, which only included one clip, suggested she was unaware that I had seen the original. She likely assumed Roger wouldn't be so careless as to keep all the incriminating evidence in one place. The message also reminded me that I hadn't sent the clips to Mary. I hadn't heard from my children that week, but given their self-absorption, was that really surprising? This also hinted at a lack of communication between Mary and Flo, perhaps due to Mary's anger or Flo's embarrassment. I called Mary to confirm she still wanted the video. She did. It was during that same conversation that I found out Flo had moved back in with her parents. When I burned both Take 8 and the original onto a DVD, I realized I hadn't actually watched takes 2 through 7. So I did. In doing so, they extinguished every remaining soft or forgiving part of my heart, turning it into unyielding concrete. To say they both lost control would be an understatement. The same look of disgust appeared on their faces as Flo had in the original version. I almost reconsidered and sent the clips to everyone in Flo's address book before I calmed down and thought about how it would impact my children. I tried to find Roger, but he had already skipped town. No, Flo won't be forgiven, and unfortunately, Roger won't get a third broken nose. I sent all the clips to Mary with a warning that if I heard any complaints about how I treated Flo, I'd release the entire video. She must have done a good job, because one by one, Flo's parents, Eric and Patty, called to tell me they understood why my marriage was over. Later on, I discovered that Mary recounted the entire ordeal to them and offered to show the clips as proof. Only Flo's mother took her up on the offer. Struggling to believe the narrative, she apparently became ill halfway through watching the original clip. Following this, Flo didn't contest the divorce. Through Mary, I found out she had found refuge from the toxic environment at her parents' house by renting a small apartment. I wasn't aiming to cheat her in the divorce. 24 solid years had to count for something, and I didn't want any repercussions from my children down the line. If and when they eventually forgave their mother, Flo sent me a sincere letter apologizing for her actions and attempted cover-up. The loneliness she expressed leaped off the pages. She pleaded for forgiveness, but more to reconcile with herself. Her appeals for me to forgive her for the sake of her parents, our children, and mutual friends nearly moved me to tears. Nearly. I wasn't seeking a replacement yet, but there was no shortage of single women vying for my attention. Ask any middle-aged woman about the availability of suitable, decent-looking men with good morals, and she'll paint a bleak picture. I'm looking forward to meeting new ones. And since I have no intention of marrying again, I anticipate many, many such encounters.
I usually don't ask this early, But if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks. James Hargrove. A 35-year-old marketing executive from Manchester, loyal, hardworking, and deeply in love with his wife. He has a sharp mind for business and prides himself on being practical and grounded. His steady nature contrasts with the emotional whirlwind that will soon engulf him. Emily Hargrove. A 32-year-old interior designer who loves the finer things in life. She's vivacious, charming, and always up for a night out with friends. Though she once adored James, she's begun to crave something more exciting, and this thirst for thrill leads her down a dangerous path. Mark Walters. A 38-year-old wealthy businessman who thrives on adventure and risk. He's charismatic, handsome, and manipulative, knowing exactly how to woo women like Emily. He exudes confidence, and his forbidden allure is what draws Emily toward him. James Hargrove thought he had it all: a loving wife, a good job, and a future filled with promise. He and Emily had been married for 7 years, building a life together in their suburban Manchester home. To James, they were the perfect couple. They laughed together, traveled when they could, and shared their dreams of starting a family soon. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Emily had changed. What was once spontaneous passion turned into routine, and the connection they had in their early years now felt like a distant memory. James, ever trusting, chalked it up to the natural progression of a long-term relationship. Everyone hit rough patches, right? But little did he know, the change in Emily wasn't just a phase. It was something much deeper, something he was about to uncover in the most devastating way possible. James sat in the kitchen, his laptop open, sipping his coffee as he replied to some work emails. Emily was out, again. Lately, she'd been out more and more, saying she was catching up with old friends, or had interior design projects that required late-night consultations. James had never doubted her before, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. It started small. Emily's phone, which used to sit on the kitchen counter or by her side, was now always in her hand, face down. The once loving texts she'd send him throughout the day had become brief and to the point. Conversations about their future had dwindled, and the playful banter that once filled their evenings had given way to silence. One night after Emily had come home unusually late, James decided to ask her directly. "Emily, is everything okay between us?" His voice was soft, filled with concern. She looked up from her phone, her face a mask of indifference. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. You've just been distant lately." Emily sighed and set her phone down. "James, it's nothing. I've just been busy with work. You know how demanding clients can be." James wanted to believe her, but his gut told him otherwise. Yet, he nodded, not wanting to push the issue further. It wasn't long after that conversation when James met Mark Walters for the first time. He and Emily had been invited to a dinner party hosted by one of her friends, Sarah, in the city center. James had never been particularly fond of these social gatherings, but he knew Emily enjoyed them. So, he went along. The party was held in Sarah's lavish flat in Deansgate, filled with people James didn't recognize. As the evening wore on, James found himself in a conversation with a group of men discussing football, while Emily flitted about, charming everyone with her wit and laughter. She looked radiant that night, in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure perfectly. James couldn't help but admire her from across the room. It was during one of those moments of admiration that James noticed a man watching Emily, a tall, dark-haired man with a sharp jawline and an expensive suit. James caught his eye and smiled politely, but the man didn't reciprocate. Instead, he continued to watch Emily with an intensity that made James uneasy. Later in the evening, Emily introduced him. "James, this is Mark Walters. He's an old friend of Sarah's. Mark, this is my husband, James." Mark extended his hand, his grip firm but cold. "Nice to meet you, James. I've heard a lot about you." James smiled politely. "All good things, I hope." "Of course," Mark replied, though there was something in his tone that James didn't like. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but James couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Mark. He seemed too interested in Emily, and the way Emily laughed at his jokes, the way her hand rested on his arm just a little too long, made James uneasy. But once again, James pushed the thoughts aside. Emily was his wife. She loved him. She wouldn't betray him like that. Over the next few weeks, James noticed more changes in Emily. She was more secretive, more withdrawn, and whenever he asked her about her day, her answers were vague. One night, James decided to surprise her with a romantic dinner at home. He cooked her favorite meal, lasagna, and set the table with candles and their best silverware. He waited for her to come home, eager to rekindle the romance that seemed to be slipping away. But Emily didn't come home, not until nearly midnight, and when she did, she was distant, distracted. "Where were you?" James asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Work ran late," she replied curtly, barely glancing at the candle-lit table. James looked at her, his heart sinking. "I made dinner. I thought we could spend some time together." Emily glanced at the table, then back at James. "I'm not hungry. I'm exhausted, James. I'm going to bed." As she walked past him and up the stairs, James felt a pang of helplessness. The woman he loved was slipping away from him, and he didn't know how to stop it. James couldn't ignore the signs anymore. He didn't want to believe that Emily was cheating, but the evidence was mounting. She was gone more often, her affection had cooled, and every time Mark Walters' name came up, she seemed to light up in a way she didn't with him anymore. One evening, while Emily was out working late, James decided to check her phone. She'd left it on the counter while she was in the shower. His hands trembled as he picked it up, his heart pounding in his chest. He unlocked the phone, feeling a pang of guilt, but his suspicions were confirmed almost immediately. There were messages from Mark, flirty, suggestive messages that made James feel sick to his stomach. Mark: "I can't wait to see you tonight. That dress you wore last time, wear it again. It drives me wild." Emily: "I was thinking of something a little more daring tonight." James stared at the screen, his hands shaking, bile rising in his throat. His worst fears had come true. Emily was cheating on him. And worse, she didn't even seem to care about hiding it anymore. He placed the phone back on the counter, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? Confront her? Demand an explanation? But as he stood there, another thought entered his mind. What if he could catch her in the act? The night that everything changed was a cool autumn evening, much like any other. James had come home earlier than usual, feeling uneasy after discovering those messages. He didn't want to confront Emily just yet. He wanted to see for himself, to confirm what he already knew deep down. As he approached their house, he noticed that the bedroom light was on, a soft golden glow spilling through the blinds. James parked the car and sat there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Something felt off. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the house, keeping to the shadows. When he reached the side of the house, he looked up at the bedroom window, and that's when he saw it. Through the small gap in the curtains, James saw Emily standing in front of the mirror, wearing a lingerie set he'd never seen before. She was laughing, her head thrown back in a way that made James's stomach twist with jealousy and pain. And then he saw Mark. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her with a smug smile on his face. Emily turned to him, her hands moving seductively over her body as she performed a striptease. something she hadn't done for James in years. James felt a lump rise in his throat. His hands clenched into fists. His entire world shattered in that moment. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his heart, was giving herself to another man right in their own bedroom. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All he could do was watch as Emily removed her lingerie piece by piece until she stood naked in front of Mark, who reached out to touch her. That was enough. James turned away, his heart racing, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, disbelief. It all hit him at once, a wave of pain that left him breathless. James didn't confront them that night. He couldn't. Instead, he drove to a hotel and checked in, his mind numb with shock. He couldn't believe what he had seen. The woman he had loved for so long, the woman he had built a life with, had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. The next morning, he went home, packed a bag, and left a note for Emily. "I know everything. Don't bother coming after me." And just like that, James walked away from the life he had built with Emily. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He could never go back to the way things were. Thank you for reading this heart-wrenching tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the courage to walk away from a toxic relationship.
The dim-lit winery felt suffocating as I nursed my glass of Merlot, the rich aroma failing to calm my nerves. Mia's concerned gaze bore into me, her brow furrowed as she waited for me to break the tense silence. "It's Adrian," I finally confessed, my voice trembling. "He's been lying to me about everything." Mia's eyes widened, and she leaned closer, her voice hushed. "What do you mean? What happened?" I took a steadying breath, recounting the events from earlier that evening. I arrived a little early, hoping to surprise him before the tasting event started, but when I stepped into his office, I overheard a heated argument. The memory flooded back, Adrian's usually composed demeanor shattered as he hissed into the phone. "Kara, please, you have to understand." "Kara?" Mia's brow furrowed deeper. "Isn't that his wife's name?" I nodded, my throat tightening. That's when she walked in, this stunning woman, dripping in diamonds and designer labels. She took one look at me and sneered, "So, you're the latest conquest, hmm?" Tears stung my eyes as I recalled Kara's icy glare. Adrian tried to defuse the situation, but she wasn't having it. She turned to me and said, "Let me save you the trouble, dear. That man is a pathological liar, and you're just another pawn in his twisted game." Mia's mouth hung open, her hand gripping mine in a comforting squeeze. "Oh, Lena, I'm so sorry." I shook my head, anger and humiliation swirling within me. "That's not even the worst part." Kara then looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you think you know the real Adrian, you're sadly mistaken. But don't worry, you'll find out soon enough." Mia's grip tightened, her expression a mix of sympathy and fury. That's just cruel. What did Adrian say?" "He tried to brush it off, claiming Kara was just being dramatic as usual," I scoffed, the memory leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. But the way she looked at me, Mia, it was like she knew something I didn't, like she was daring me to uncover the truth. Mia's eyes narrowed, her protective instincts kicking in. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Lena. One way or another, we'll find out what kind of game Adrian is really playing." As I drained the last of my wine, a newfound determination washed over me. Kara's enigmatic warning echoed in my mind, fueling a desperate need to confront the man I thought I knew. Adrian's web of lies was unraveling, and I intended to untangle every last thread, no matter how painful the truth might be. Adrian's mansion loomed before me, its grand facade mocking the turmoil that churned within. As I stepped through the ornate double doors, the overwhelming scent of wealth assaulted my senses, a sickening blend of expensive leather and Adrian's signature cologne. He greeted me with a forced smile, his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. "Lena, my dear, I'm so glad you came." I held up a hand, cutting off his rehearsed pleasantries. "Cut the act, Adrian. We need to talk." His bravado faltered, and he ushered me into the study, closing the door behind us with a heavy thud. "I assume this is about Kara's little outburst," he began, his tone dripping with disdain. "You know how dramatic she can be." "Dramatic?" I scoffed, anger flaring within me. "She accused you of lying to me, Adrian, of using me as some kind of pawn in your twisted games. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. Lena, you have to understand, my marriage to Kara, it's complicated. We've been struggling for years, and her family's wealth is the only thing keeping this winery afloat. My jaw clenched as the pieces began to fall into place. So, what? You've been using her money to fund your lavish lifestyle, all while carrying on affairs behind her back? Adrian's eyes hardened, his mask of charm slipping. It's not that simple. Kara knew about my indiscretions from the start, but she didn't care, as long as I played the part of the doting husband in public. It's all a facade, Lena. A game we've both been playing. I recoiled, disgust churning in my stomach. And what about me, Adrian? Was I just another prop in your twisted little charade? He reached for my hand, his touch sending a shiver of revulsion down my spine. Of course not, my love. What we have is real. Everything I've done, it's all been for us, for our future together. I yanked my hand away, his words like venom seeping into my veins. Our future? I spat, shaking my head in disbelief. How can you talk about our future when you've built your entire life on lies? Adrian's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening with determination. Because I love you, Lena, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make our dreams a reality. As he spoke those words, a chill ran down my spine. The man before me was a stranger, his charming facade crumbling to reveal a twisted, manipulative soul. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how deep my feelings ran, I could never trust a word that fell from his deceitful lips. The harsh buzz of my phone jolted me from my restless slumber. Groggily, I fumbled for the device, squinting at the caller ID. It was Mia. Hello? My voice was thick with exhaustion. Lena, thank God you picked up, Mia blurted, her tone laced with urgency. We need to talk, in person. An icy tendril of dread snaked through me. What's going on? It's about Adrian, she said, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper. I've uncovered some unsettling information. Within the hour, I found myself at Mia's doorstep, anxiety gnawing at my insides. She ushered me inside, her expression grave. Spill it, I demanded, bracing myself for the worst. Mia took a deep breath. Remember Samantha Wilkins from college? The one who transferred after our sophomore year? I nodded, my brow furrowing in confusion. Well, I ran into her at the grocery store yesterday, Mia continued, and she mentioned something. Disturbing. My heart pounded in my ears as I waited for her to continue. Apparently, she and Adrian had a fling a few years back, Mia revealed, her words like a punch to the gut. And according to Samantha, he was stringing along multiple women at the same time, feeding them all the same lies about leaving his wife. I felt the room spin, nausea churning in my stomach. No, it can't be. Mia's expression hardened. That's not all. Samantha said that once Kara caught wind of Adrian's affairs, she went into full-on revenge mode. She's been gathering evidence, documenting every sordid detail, all to strip him of everything in their inevitable divorce. My head was reeling, Adrian's betrayal cutting deeper with each revelation. But why go to such extremes? Mia's gaze softened. Kara's family is obscenely wealthy, Lena. If she plays her cards right, she could not only take the winery but destroy Adrian's reputation in the process. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. So while he's been playing us all for fools, his wife has been playing the long game. Mia reached out, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. I'm so sorry, Lena. I know how much you cared for him. Tears stung my eyes as the weight of Adrian's deceit crashed over me. The man I thought I knew, the future I had envisioned, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed mirage designed to feed his insatiable ego and greed. But as the shock gave way to simmering rage, a newfound determination took root. Kara's methodical plotting had opened my eyes, and I silently vowed that Adrian would face the consequences of his actions. No matter what it took, I would ensure that he reaped the bitter harvest he had sown. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the cozy cafe, but its usual comforting scent did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I clutched my mug, the warmth seeping into my palms as I replayed Mia's words in my mind, desperate to make sense of Adrian's ever-deepening web of lies. A familiar voice sliced through the ambient chatter, causing me to stiffen in my seat. It was Kara, her perfectly coiffed appearance a stark contrast to the icy venom dripping from her words. That snake has another thing coming, if he thinks I'll let him slither away unscathed, she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the tabletop. Across from her sat a well-dressed man, his sharp features and calculating gaze marking him as a force to be reckoned with, no doubt Kara's attorney. "Rest assured, Mrs. Bellamy," he replied, his tone clipped and professional. "My team has compiled an ironclad case against your husband. Once we expose his sordid affairs and financial misdeeds, the courts will have no choice but to strip him of everything." Kara's crimson-painted lips curved into a vindictive smile. "Good. That two-timing snake deserves to lose it all, his precious winery, his inflated ego, every last cent." My heart pounded in my chest as realization washed over me. This wasn't just a bitter divorce. It was a meticulously orchestrated takedown, and Adrian was the unfortunate target in Kara's crosshairs. "And those whores he's been cavorting with?" Kara sneered, her eyes glinting with malice. "They'll get their just desserts, too. I want their dirty little secrets dragged out into the open for everyone to see." My blood ran cold, the implications of her words sinking in like a lead weight. She wasn't just after Adrian. She was coming for all of us, his unsuspecting conquests caught in the crossfire of her vengeful crusade. The lawyer nodded, his expression betraying no emotion. "Consider it done, Mrs. Bellamy. Your husband's indiscretions will be laid bare for the world to witness." As they rose to leave, Kara's gaze momentarily locked with mine, her eyes narrowing in recognition. A cruel smirk played at the corners of her mouth, a silent taunt that sent a chill down my spine. In that fleeting moment, I understood the depth of her fury, the meticulously plotted retribution that would leave no stone unturned, no secret unexposed. And as the gravity of my own role in Adrian's downfall dawned on me, a single sobering thought took root. I was well and truly caught in the crosshairs of a war I never saw coming. The winery's grand hall buzzed with excitement as guests mingled, sipping flutes of our latest vintage. But beneath the laughter and polished veneers, a storm was brewing, a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of Adrian's carefully constructed facade. I spotted him across the room, his charming smile firmly in place as he worked the crowd like a seasoned performer. My heart clenched with a potent mix of anger and remorse, the weight of his betrayal threatening to suffocate me. Before I could second-guess myself, I strode toward him, weaving through the clusters of well-heeled socialites until I stood mere feet away. "Adrian," I called out, my voice ringing with steely resolve. He turned, his easy grin faltering as our eyes met. "Lena, darling, what a pleasure to—" "Cut the act," I snapped, my words slicing through his rehearsed pleasantries. "We need to talk, in private." His brow furrowed, but he nodded, leading me through a side door and into the shadowed confines of the empty barrel room. The heavy thud of the door closing behind us seemed to echo off the weathered oak, underscoring the weight of the confrontation to come. Adrian's mask slipped, his expression hardening. "What's this about, Lena? You're causing quite a scene." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "A scene? Please, Adrian, we both know this entire charade is one big performance." I stepped closer, my words laced with venom. "I know everything. The lies, the affairs, Kara's meticulous plan to strip you of everything you've built on deceit." His eyes widened, panic flickering across his features before he regained his composure. "Lena, whatever Kara has told you—" "It's not just Kara," I cut him off, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "I've heard it from others, too, people you've used and discarded like pawns in your twisted games." Adrian's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "I see. So, you've chosen to align yourself with my vengeful wife, is that it?" I matched his steely glare, undeterred. "I've chosen to stand against your lies, Adrian, against the web of manipulation you've spun, ensnaring anyone foolish enough to fall for your charms." His lips curved into a contemptuous sneer. "And what, pray tell, do you hope to gain from this misguided crusade? A pat on the back from Kara? A fleeting sense of vindication before she casts you aside like the rest of us?" I stepped closer, my voice lowering to a fierce whisper. "I want you to face the consequences of your actions, Adrian. I want you to reap what you've sown, the pain, the humiliation, the utter destruction of everything you've built on deceit." For a moment, Adrian's mask slipped, his eyes flickering with genuine fear. But just as quickly, his bravado returned, a cruel smirk twisting his features. "Very well, my dear," he purred, his voice laced with menace. "If it's a war you want, you'll have it. But mark my words, When the dust settles, you'll deeply regret throwing in your lot with Kara." As he turned on his heel and stormed out, I couldn't help but shiver at the ominous promise lingering in his wake. But any trepidation was overshadowed by a fierce determination, a resolve to see this bitter feud through to its inevitable, catastrophic end. Come what may, Adrian would face the consequences he so richly deserved. And I would be there, standing resolute to witness his downfall. The stale air of the courtroom hung heavy, charged with tension as I took my place on the witness stand. Across the aisle, Adrian sat rigidly, his once charming veneer cracked and fading under the harsh reality of his impending reckoning. Kara's attorney, Mr. Morris, approached me, his gaze steely and calculating. "Ms. Rivers, please state your relationship to the defendant." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Adrian Bellamy and I were involved in an intimate relationship for nearly a year. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, but Morris silenced it with a sharp look. "And during this time, were you aware of Mr. Bellamy's marital status?" My jaw tightened. "No, Adrian deliberately misled me, claiming he was separated from his wife." Morris nodded, his expression grave. "I see. And when did you become aware of the true nature of his deception?" The memories flooded back, the confrontation at the winery, the sickening revelations about Adrian's multiple affairs. It was brought to my attention by Mrs. Bellamy herself, as well as other sources, that Adrian had been engaging in numerous extramarital affairs while portraying a very different public image. "Objection, Your Honor," Adrian's lawyer barked, jumping to his feet. "Hearsay and speculation." The judge fixed me with a stern look. "Ms. Rivers, please confine your testimony to first-hand knowledge and facts." I took a steadying breath. "Very well. What I can attest to is Adrian's pattern of dishonest behavior and blatant disregard for the truth. He lied to me repeatedly about the nature of his marriage, his financial situation, and his intentions for our future together." Morris nodded, his expression grim. "Thank you, Miss Rivers. No further questions for now." He turned to face the judge. "Your Honor, we would like to submit into evidence a series of documented communications between the defendant and various other women, demonstrating a clear pattern of infidelity and emotional manipulation." As the damning evidence was presented, I risked a glance at Adrian. His usual bravado had crumbled, his shoulders slumped in defeat as the weight of his transgressions bore down upon him. Morris continued his relentless assault, painting a vivid picture of Adrian's web of lies and the calculated efforts to conceal his indiscretions from his wife. With each revelation, each incriminating piece of evidence, the noose around Adrian's neck tightened. Finally, Morris turned to me once more. "Miss Rivers, in your opinion, based on your first-hand experience, what motivated the defendant's actions?" I took a deep breath, meeting Adrian's hollow gaze head-on. "Greed and ego," I stated firmly. "Adrian Bellamy is a man consumed by his own desires, willing to crush anyone and anything in his path to maintain his lavish lifestyle and inflated sense of self-worth." A deafening silence fell over the courtroom as my words hung in the air, their weight undeniable. In that moment, I saw the last remnants of Adrian's arrogant facade shatter, laying bare the ugly truth that had been festering beneath the surface all along. As I stepped down from the stand, a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. The wheels of justice were in motion, and Adrian's carefully constructed house of cards was crumbling around him. After so many lies, so much pain and heartache, he would finally face the consequences of his actions. The cavernous interior of Adrian's once opulent home echoed with a deafening silence, its grand furnishings and lavish decor now mere relics of a life built on deceit. As I stepped into the dimly lit foyer, the weight of his downfall seemed palpable, a tangible presence hanging in the stale air. "Lena?" Kara's voice sliced through the stillness, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she emerged from the shadows. "I'm glad you could make it." I nodded, my gaze drifting to the packed boxes lining the walls. "So, it's really happening. He's losing everything." A ghost of a smile played across Kara's perfectly painted lips. "Oh, it's far more than that, my dear. Adrian's reckoning has been a long time coming." She beckoned me to follow, leading me into the study, where Adrian had once spun his tangled web of lies. The remnants of his former life were scattered about, half-empty bottles of scotch, framed photos lying face down, a forgotten cigar smoldering in an ashtray. "Do you know why I fought so hard to strip him of all this?" Kara mused, her fingers trailing along the edge of the ornately carved desk. It wasn't just about the money or the winery. It was about unveiling the truth, about tearing down the facade he so carefully constructed. I tensed, sensing an undercurrent of something darker lurking beneath her words. What do you mean? Kara's gaze found mine, her eyes glinting with a chilling intensity. I knew about his affairs from the beginning, Lena. Every sordid tryst, every empty promise whispered in the throes of passion. I catalogued it all, biding my time until the perfect moment to strike. A shiver ran down my spine as the full extent of her meticulously plotted revenge dawned on me. You used me, us, all of his mistresses, just pawns in your game. Her delicate shoulders rose in an elegant shrug. A necessary sacrifice, I'm afraid. You see, Adrian's greatest downfall wasn't his insatiable appetite for infidelity. It was his arrogance, his unwavering belief that he could continue to spin his lies indefinitely without consequence. I recoiled, sickened by the calculated cruelty behind her actions. So, what? You decided to teach him a lesson by destroying not just his life, but the lives of anyone caught in the crossfire? Kara's gaze hardened, her voice taking on a razor-sharp edge. Some lessons, dear Lena, can only be learned through the harshest of methods. Adrian needed to lose everything, his wealth, his status, his fragile sense of superiority, and if collateral damage was unavoidable in that pursuit, then so be it. As her words hung in the air, I found myself questioning the lines between justice and retribution, vengeance and vindication. Kara's actions, however calculated, had left a trail of devastation in their wake. Lives upended, reputations shattered, all in service of her single-minded quest for revenge. And in that moment, as I stood amidst the ruins of Adrian's former life, I couldn't help but wonder, had we, his unwitting pawns, simply traded one devil for another? The crisp autumn breeze carried the faint scent of change as I settled onto the worn leather couch, my therapist's gentle gaze fixed upon me with a patient understanding. It had been months since the explosive downfall of Adrian Bellamy, and yet the reverberations of that tumultuous chapter still echoed within me. "How are you feeling today, Lena?" Dr. Wilkins prompted, her voice a soothing balm against the memories that threatened to resurface. I took a steadying breath, gathering my thoughts. Better, I think. It's been a process, coming to terms with everything that happened. Her brow furrowed with concern. The sense of betrayal must have been overwhelming, not just from Adrian, but from Kara as well, using you and the others as pawns in her revenge. A rueful smile tugged at my lips. That's an understatement. For a while, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies and manipulation, unable to trust my own judgment. Dr. Wilkins nodded, her expression one of quiet empathy. Yet here you are, emerging from that storm stronger and wiser. What has helped you find solid ground again? The answer came easily, a newfound sense of purpose burning brightly within me. Helping others who have been through similar situations, lending an understanding ear, offering guidance and resources, it's been cathartic in a way. A proud smile graced the therapist's features. That's wonderful, Lena. Turning your pain into a catalyst for positive change is an incredibly brave and selfless act. As our session drew to a close, I stepped out into the crisp air, inhaling deeply. The weight that had once threatened to crush me had lightened, replaced by a steely resolve and a profound sense of growth. Later that evening, as I sipped a glass of rich Cabernet, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Mia, her voice tinged with a mix of sympathy and triumph. "Lena, did you hear? Adrian's been spotted, living out of a run-down motel on the outskirts of town." A pang of something indescribable tugged at my heart, a strange amalgam of pity and vindication. The man who had once commanded such wealth and prestige had been reduced to a shadow of his former self, his grand ambitions crumbling beneath the weight of his own misdeeds. "I did hear, yeah," I replied, my voice steady. "It's a lot to take in, seeing how far he's fallen." Mia's tone softened. "Are you going to be okay? I know this whole ordeal has been incredibly difficult for you." A soft, resolute smile curved my lips as I gazed out at the setting sun, its warm hues painting the sky in vibrant shades of redemption. "I'm going to be just fine, Mia. In fact, I've never felt more ready to embrace the future, one free from Adrian's twisted lies and the toxic cycles of deceit." As I uttered those words, a profound sense of peace washed over me. a quiet affirmation that the darkest chapters of our lives possess the power to reshape us, to forge us into beacons of strength and resilience. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was crystal clear. I would never again surrender my truth to the whims of those who sought to diminish it. Adrian's reign of deception had met its demise, and in its ashes, a fiercer, wiser version of myself was rising, ready to face the world on my own terms.
Title: I walked into our home only to find my cheating wife and her lover. Waiting, what happened next was revenge. You'll never forget. What would you do if you stepped into the comfort of your own home, only to find your wife sitting smugly alongside her lover, as though they had just won a game you didn't even know you were playing? For Ethan Carter, a financial analyst living in the heart of Chicago, that moment wasn't just a betrayal, it was a reckoning. That night wasn't the first time Ethan suspected something was off. Late-night phone calls, unaccounted work meetings, and an air of secrecy had been lingering in the background of his seemingly perfect marriage. But what his wife, Olivia, and her lover James didn't realize was that Ethan had been one step ahead of them all along. As he walked into their West Loop apartment, Olivia's confident smirk and James's arrogant posture told him everything he needed to know. They thought they were untouchable. But little did they know, the groundwork for Ethan's revenge had already been set in motion. What happened next wasn't just payback, it was justice served in a way that neither of them would ever forget. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about how one man turned the tables in a way that left everyone talking. Ethan Carter's life with Olivia had always appeared flawless to anyone looking from the outside. They were the quintessential Chicago couple, young, successful, and deeply in love, or so Ethan thought. Their marriage was built on trust, or at least that's what Ethan believed during their years together. Weekends at the Lake Michigan shoreline, late-night takeouts from their favorite West Loop diners, and shared dreams of starting a family made their bond seem unbreakable. But cracks began to form in this perfect picture. It started small. Unexplained late-night phone calls where Olivia claimed it was work, or business trips to San Francisco that seemed oddly timed. Her once warm and affectionate demeanor turned cold, almost distant. The woman who used to laugh at Ethan's jokes during their morning coffee dates at the Bookseller Cafe now seemed preoccupied, her mind elsewhere. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At first, he dismissed his suspicions as paranoia, chalking it up to work stress or the natural ebb and flow of marriage. But the signs became harder to ignore. One evening, while Olivia was in the shower, Ethan's suspicions reached a breaking point. Her phone, left unattended on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a message that caught his attention. It was from a contact saved as Maya, but the message read, "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." Ethan's stomach dropped. Maya wasn't a coworker or a friend. Ethan knew every name in Olivia's close circle. His hands trembled as he scrolled further and discovered an entire thread of messages exchanged over the past few weeks. The texts left no room for doubt. Olivia was cheating on him. The discovery hit Ethan like a freight train, leaving him gutted. Anger surged through him, but so did heartbreak, a profound sense of betrayal by the woman he had vowed to spend his life with. Yet, in the midst of the emotional turmoil, something within Ethan shifted. He wasn't going to let himself be the victim of their deceit. As he closed her phone and put it back in its place, he knew one thing for sure. He needed answers, and more importantly, he needed a plan. The seeds of Ethan's revenge were planted that night, growing steadily as he connected the dots and pieced together the extent of Olivia's betrayal. What started as heartbreak was beginning to transform into cold, calculated resolve.
Ethan Carter wasn't the kind of man to act impulsively, and this situation was no exception. The night he uncovered Olivia's betrayal, he made a choice. Instead of confronting her immediately, he would wait. Rushing in with raw emotion would give them the upper hand, and Ethan refused to be the victim. If Olivia and her lover thought they were untouchable, he would let them bask in that false sense of security, just long enough to make his move. Over the following days, Ethan quietly gathered every piece of evidence he could find. The text messages on her phone were just the beginning. A little digging led him to receipts for expensive dinners at restaurants they had never visited together, hotel stays that coincided with her business trips, and even social media check-ins that Olivia had conveniently forgotten to mention. With every new piece of proof, Ethan's resolve grew stronger. But he knew that simply presenting the evidence wasn't enough. He wanted to expose them in a way they would never forget. A moment so unforgettable it would haunt them for years to come. Ethan picked his moment carefully. He knew Olivia and her lover, James, had grown comfortable meeting at their apartment, a place Ethan once considered his safe haven. He decided to turn the tables on them in the very setting they had defiled. The plan was simple but brilliant: catch them together and confront them face to face. For added impact, he coordinated his arrival with a few key players, friends and family members who had always seen Olivia as the perfect wife. He wanted witnesses, not just to the betrayal, but to the truth of who Olivia really was. On the night of the confrontation, Ethan felt an eerie calm wash over him as he walked toward the door of his West Loop apartment. His heart should have been pounding, but instead, it was steady. He had played this moment over and over in his mind, preparing for every possible reaction from Olivia and James. If they were bold enough to betray him in his own home, Ethan would ensure that their arrogance would be their undoing. This wasn't just about exposing their affair, it was about reclaiming his dignity. As he turned the key in the lock and stepped inside, he knew the stage was set. Olivia and James had no idea what was about to hit them. As Ethan stepped into the apartment, the tension in the air was almost palpable. The faint aroma of Olivia's favorite candle filled the space, but tonight, it felt suffocating rather than comforting. There they were, Olivia and James, sitting on the living room couch like they owned the place. Olivia wore a smug expression, her arms crossed as if she had been waiting for this moment. James, leaning back casually, gave Ethan a once-over with a condescending smirk that made Ethan's blood boil. They weren't just betraying him, they were flaunting it. "Ethan," Olivia began, her tone sharp and rehearsed. "We need to talk." Her words were deliberate, designed to paint herself as the victim. She stood up, tilting her head in mock concern. "You've been so distant lately, and honestly, this marriage hasn't been working for a while now." It was clear she was trying to flip the narrative, positioning herself as the one who had been wronged. Ethan listened silently, his face unreadable, letting her dig the hole deeper. James, sitting comfortably on the couch, decided to chime in. "Maybe if you'd paid her more attention, things wouldn't have gotten to this point." His voice was smooth, dripping with arrogance, as if he was doing Ethan a favor by offering his opinion. The sheer audacity of the comment made Ethan's jaw tighten, but he refused to react. That's what they wanted, for him to lose control, to yell, to make a scene that would let them walk away as the so-called victims. Olivia, emboldened by James's support, continued her attempt to rewrite the story. "Ethan, you've been so focused on work, so emotionally unavailable. I didn't want this to happen, but James, he's been there for me in ways you never were." Her words stung, but Ethan wasn't about to let her manipulation cloud the truth. He had seen the messages, the receipts, the lies. The betrayal was real, and no amount of blame-shifting could change that. The room was thick with tension, but Ethan's silence unnerved them. He simply stood there, his expression calm, yet unreadable. Olivia faltered slightly, her confidence beginning to waver under his steady gaze. James, however, remained smug, clearly believing he had won some sort of prize. What they didn't realize was that Ethan was still holding all the cards. The moment of reckoning was near, and they had no idea what was coming. Ethan's calm demeanor wasn't an accident. It was the result of meticulous planning. As Olivia and James continued their smug performance, oblivious to the storm about to hit them, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "It's interesting," he said, breaking his silence for the first time. You've worked so hard to convince yourselves I'm the problem, but I think it's time we let the truth speak for itself." With a few taps on his phone, Ethan cast a video onto the large TV mounted on the wall. Olivia's expression froze as the screen came to life. It was a hidden camera recording from their apartment, their supposed safe haven for their affair. The footage showed her and James embracing, laughing, and whispering sweet nothings just days earlier, right there on the same couch where they now sat. The sound of their voices filled the room, undeniable and damning. Olivia's face turned ghostly pale, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something, but no words came. James, who had been so arrogant just moments before, shifted uncomfortably, his smirk replaced with a look of pure panic. You were spying on us?" Olivia finally stammered, her voice trembling. Ethan's gaze was steely as he replied, "I wasn't spying. I was protecting myself from the lies you've been feeding me for months." But this wasn't just about Ethan knowing the truth. He had gone a step further. Before coming home that night, Ethan had sent the footage to key people in their lives, Olivia's parents, her closest friends, and even James's wife, who Ethan had personally contacted to ensure she knew everything. The betrayal wasn't just exposed in the room, it was exposed to the world. Olivia's phone began buzzing incessantly on the coffee table as messages and calls flooded in. The reality of the situation hit her like a tidal wave. There was no escaping this. The perfect image she had so carefully cultivated was crumbling before her eyes. Meanwhile, James frantically muttered something about damage control and legal repercussions, but Ethan wasn't listening. He had no interest in their excuses or desperate attempts to salvage their reputations. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about holding them accountable. The apartment, once a place of betrayal, had become the stage for their undoing. Ethan had taken back the power they thought they had stolen from him, and as he stood there watching their world fall apart, he felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of closure. The moment the recording ended, the room descended into chaos. Olivia's face, once smug and confident, twisted into a mask of shock and desperation. Her lips trembled as she stumbled forward, trying to reach Ethan. "Ethan, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of her panic. The confident, calculating woman who had been spinning lies just moments ago was now reduced to tears. She clung to his arm, her eyes wide with fear, as though she finally understood the magnitude of what she had done. James, on the other hand, stood frozen, his face flushed with humiliation. The arrogance he had displayed earlier had evaporated, replaced by an awkward, stammering attempt to justify himself. "Look, man, this isn't what it seems," he began, but Ethan silenced him with a single glance. There was no room for excuses. Ethan had all the proof he needed, and James knew it. His shoulders slumped as the weight of the situation bore down on him. Olivia, however, refused to give up. She fell to her knees, clutching Ethan's hand with both of hers. "I made a mistake, Ethan," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Please, just give me another chance. We can fix this." Her tears fell freely, but Ethan remained unmoved. The pain of her betrayal still burned within him, but he had made a decision long before this moment. There would be no going back. Ethan pulled his hand away, his expression cold and resolute. "Fix this?" he repeated, his voice low and steady. "You didn't make a mistake, Olivia. You made a choice. Every text, every lie, every time you brought him into our home, you made a choice. And now you have to live with it." His words cut through her pleas like a blade, leaving no room for negotiation. James shifted uncomfortably, his confidence completely shattered. He muttered something about needing to leave, but Ethan blocked his path. "You're not walking away from this so easily," Ethan said firmly. "Your wife already knows. I made sure she got the proof before I came here." James's face turned ashen, and he stumbled backward, realizing that there was nowhere to run. The power dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. Olivia and James were no longer in control. They were exposed, humiliated, and utterly powerless. Ethan didn't feel satisfaction in their suffering, but he did feel closure. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finally breaking free from their deceit. The fallout from that night was swift and devastating, though not for Ethan. For Olivia and James, the walls of their deceit came crashing down, leaving them exposed to the harsh judgment of those around them. Word of their betrayal spread like wildfire, thanks to the undeniable evidence
Ethan had shared. Olivia's once pristine reputation among her friends, colleagues, and family crumbled under the weight of her actions. Invitations to events dried up, whispers followed her wherever she went, and even her closest friends found it hard to look her in the eye. James faced an equally grim fate. The revelation of his affair not only destroyed his marriage, but also jeopardized his career. As a corporate lawyer working at a prestigious downtown firm, his personal conduct was held to high standards. When his wife forwarded the incriminating footage to his employer, the fallout was unavoidable. Clients pulled away, colleagues whispered behind his back, and eventually, James found himself packing up his office, his career in shambles. Meanwhile, Ethan wasted no time in taking the final step to free himself from the toxicity of their marriage. The very next morning, he served Olivia with divorce papers. There was no heated argument, no chance for her to beg for reconciliation. Ethan's decision was final. He made it clear that her betrayal had left no room for forgiveness, and he walked away from their life together without looking back. For Ethan, the days following the confrontation were not easy, but they were liberating. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer controlled him. He channeled his energy into rebuilding his life, starting with small but meaningful changes. He moved out of the apartment that had been tainted by Olivia's infidelity and found a new home, a cozy loft in Wicker Park that became his sanctuary. Ethan also rediscovered parts of himself that had been buried under the weight of his broken marriage. He reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies he had long neglected, and even began volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding solace in helping others. Slowly but surely, he felt himself healing. Though the scars of betrayal would always remain, they became a reminder of his strength rather than his pain. Ethan embraced the lessons he had learned, to trust his instincts, to value his self-worth, and to never settle for less than he deserved. As the months passed, Ethan began a new chapter of his life. He wasn't looking for love, not yet, but he found happiness in his own company and in the possibilities that lay ahead. The man who had once walked into his own home to find his world shattered was now stronger, wiser, and ready to face the future with open arms. Betrayal often cuts the deepest when it comes from those we trust the most. Ethan's story is a powerful reminder that, while we cannot control the actions of others, we can control how we respond to their deceit. Instead of succumbing to anger or despair, Ethan chose to take a stand and reclaim his life with dignity and strength. His journey proves that sometimes the best revenge is not just exposing the truth, but also finding the courage to move forward, leaving behind those who don't deserve a place in our lives. Life's most painful moments often teach us the most valuable lessons, shaping us into stronger, wiser individuals. Ethan's response to betrayal wasn't just about justice, it was about self-respect and personal growth. So, if you ever find yourself betrayed, remember this. It's not the betrayal that defines you, but the way you rise from it. And speaking of unforgettable moments, this story is just the beginning. If you thought Ethan's revenge was satisfying, wait until you hear what happened at the New Year's party when a husband caught his wife cheating in front of everyone. You won't believe the twist that left the entire room in shock. Subscribe to Narrative Stories for more jaw-dropping tales of betrayal, redemption, and revenge. Thank you for being a part of this story with me. If it moved you, please give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Narrative Stories. I've noticed many of you who enjoy these stories aren't subscribed yet. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're becoming part of a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.